Okay, we've been having a lot of people who have been cycling with their point holding. The points haven't been completing. Now, I just want to remind you that just because you're not on the table doesn't mean you're not going through a healing crisis. It doesn't mean you're not burning off a lot of minerals, okay? Whenever we go through a healing crisis, we use up a lot of extra minerals. So this week in particular, in between having your points held, you're going to have to keep yourself mineralized and maybe take some extra, because it's been happening, to a lot of people. So consider.
Okay, burning in the body update list. I hear we get to cross Vivian off the list. Is this correct?
Yes.
Vivian, all right.
And Wolf too.
Did Wolf burn too? All right.
Yeah.
Anybody else need to get crossed off the no burn list? Okay, let's see. We're down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15. Down to 16. Ian? Leave you on there. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I just feel like I need to bring up this point that I think was touched upon a little bit last week, and that is the willingness to give. Remember that we're never going to receive a blessing that we're not first willing to give. And I find now, as we're getting into Body Electronics Week and the days are long and we're doing a couple sessions a day and sometimes they drag on for hours and hours, our enthusiasm level sometimes wanes a bit. And it may be difficult at times when we're in a healing crisis to really give ourselves to the person that we're holding points on. But, that's their session, and we owe that to them, to give it our best. And if we're not feeling good and we really don't want to do it and we'd rather be somewhere else, then maybe we can just intensify that and assume the virtue. Because, this attitude of unwillingness it just permeates the session. And it's really not fair to the person who's having their points held. They deserve your utmost attention,
We've gotten feedback from a number of different people here, not really by way of complaint, but simply bringing it to our attention that there have been some of the point holders that have kind of been in that bit of a rut there where they don't feel like being there, and on the one hand, maybe they're going through the motions of holding the point pretty well. I mean, maybe they're on the point. They're keeping the pressure up. They're doing all of the mechanical stuff pretty well. But the thing about it is that if their heart's not in it, that's going to have a big effect in the session. So it's not just enough to get on the point and stay on the point and keep the pressure up. It really does make a world of difference that your heart's in it and that you're there in a space where you're doing everything you can to help that person on the table. You're willing to go through whatever it takes for that person. And something that I've observed over the years is this principle that Mags brought up here, that we'll never receive a blessing that we're not willing to give to everyone else. It's very, very obvious how this works in practice when you look at body electronics. Because what I've seen consistently over the years is that the people that really can't be bothered to put themselves out for the other people. I mean, yeah, they'll show up to point holding and they'll put in the time and all that, but they won't really give anything, above and beyond the bare minimum. What I've noticed very consistently over the years is that most of the time, people that go into body electronics with that sort of attitude and that, that's where they're coming from, they don't really get very many results themselves. They don't really get anywhere when they're getting their points held, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with how good of a job their point holders are doing. I mean, their point holders are probably doing a fantastic job and being very, very giving. But the bottom line is that if a person won't give, they basically cut themselves off from receiving. And almost regardless of what anybody else does to try to help that person, they've cut themselves off from being able to receive. So please consider this when you're going through your healing crises and you feel yourself withdrawing and you feel yourself pulling back, and you find that you're really reluctant to put yourself out for that person. You don't want to press any harder on the point because it hurts your finger, or you don't want to be there any longer because you're tired and your back hurts. The thing to realize is, as we've brought up here initially, on the one hand, you may well adversely affect the session of the person on the table, but it's just as important for you to consider that in the long run, the person you're probably hurting the most is yourself. Because if you put yourself in that position, you've really backed yourself into quite a corner where it's going to take a lot of effort on your part to get out of that space. I might add, by contrast, you'll see certain individuals that come from the space where they're perfectly willing for everyone else to get the blessing first, and they're absolutely willing to do anything for the person on the table. They'll stay there as long as the session takes. They'll plug into another point when the first point's done. If the person still seems to be in the middle of something, they're willing to keep going and keep going and keep going, no matter how much their own body hurts. And what I've noticed is when people like that, they get a lot out of their point holding sessions. And again, regardless of how good a job their point holders are doing, they could have the worst point holders in the world, and they would still have a good session, because from their willingness to give, they've placed themselves in a position where the receiving is automatic. It just, all the blessings of the heavens will shower down upon a person like that. And if you watch very, very closely, you'll see that a lot of these people it almost won't make a difference whether they're on the table or whether they're holding points. They'll probably get equal results themselves either way, because once you're in the flow of life like that, where you're willing to give, you're going to be continuously receiving as well. I met a wonderful woman down in Melbourne about 10 months ago, an older woman. She's about 79, and I've kept in contact with her since then, by letter. She had probably a lot of you have heard this story, but she had a badly broken foot, and for about 13 years, where she couldn't walk properly. And she had an initial point holding session where she had some fairly fantastic things happen in terms of restructuring the foot to where she was able to place her foot flat on the ground and all that. And she probably had about 80 or 85% healing the first session. And I got a letter from her just a couple of months ago, and what she said was very, very interesting. She said that she and her daughter had kept going to point holding every week for the next 3 or 4 months, and what she stated very, very matter-of-factly was every single time she went to point holding, regardless of who was on the table, whether she was holding points or getting her points held, every single time she went to point holding, her foot got a little bit better. And basically that last 15 or 20% of the healing sort of took place in little increments over maybe like 10 or 12 weeks of point holding. And she said from her perspective, it didn't seem to make any difference one way or another whether she was on the table or whether she was holding points. It was like she was in the flow of life. She was equally happy giving as she was receiving. And so basically she was continually doing both. She was continually giving and receiving. And that's essentially what life is about. It's a dynamic thing. The moment we shut off one of these things, we shut off the other. And that's a state of stagnation and decline. If you're interested in regenerating the body, that's a state of activity and growth. And growth is a continual process of exchange. It's a continual process of giving and receiving. So do yourself the favor of not cutting yourself off from the flow.
Yeah, so the next time you're holding that point and you feel like you just wish it would finish now, just consider putting yourself in the place of the person that you're holding and giving them what you expect to have when you're on the table. It's no mistake that this program involves a give and take of point holders. It's not a client-based modality. Body electronics does not teach practitioners to go out there and work on their clients for money. We're out there educating people so that they can hold points on one another, and there's no mistake for that. With that, it's a give and a take and a receiving and giving, and we all have lessons to learn about giving, and we all have lessons to learn about receiving. We're not going to be perfect about this. Our issues are going to come up, but let's look at them and let's be willing to give and let's be willing to receive.
Who's got something on their mind here?
Thanks. What I want to talk about is one of the reasons why some of us might be having, me included, I have times when I feel like I don't want to go on with holding a point.
Me too.
One of these, it could be the bit of entity involvement in ourselves, the point holders, right? Actually, John asked me to talk about this a couple of days ago, and it just now seems an appropriate time. And what I said to John first off was, this decree doesn't always work. And he says, well, people say it too soon or, don't say it at the right time. I said, well, yeah, it could be, but in my opinion, it's like these entities, they're frying inside the people. It's like they... and the decree is just like the straw that breaks the camel's back sometimes before they move out. So anyway, I want to tell you a technique that I've used a few times since I've been here to move these entities out. And but before I describe that, I'll just give a little bit of background. Entities are a fact of life, right? There's, 25 years ago when I first started working with them, then, there wasn't much talk about them. If you said you did that, well, people were ready to consign you to the loony bin, but nowadays it's very different. You just got to open up any weekly magazine and there's plenty of references to, entity involvement in our lives. And like their influences, it's a fact of life. They'll always be pressures from the universe, no matter how much we evolve. But I've spoken before about, how they can be around us, some relationship from the past. And there's those ones that John calls little imps, right, that can move in and move out sort of thing. And they might they're just floating around and they're looking for someone who gets a little bit angry and, wow, that's a vibration I like, and they'll move in on that angry vibration or resentment or judgmental vibration, any of those sort of things. But here what we're dealing with here at Gennezano is like the heavy-duty entities. Like, you didn't need me to tell you that, I know, but these are heavy-duty ones. These are ones like that are so close to us that they're like the nose on our face sometimes. It's hard to discern, like, where do I end and they begin, sort of thing. And sometimes these entities know us almost better than we know ourselves. Okay? So these are like the heavy-duty ones. And I was talking to a friend here, and we compared them to like a house guest, but a house guest who's been around for like 500 years. Okay? And like... no, won't do the dishes. Totally will not lift a finger, lays around in the back bedroom and when we get a little bit uptight, they say, "Ooh, that's what I like," and they move in. But the rest of the time, when we're operating from love, unconditional love, or from enthusiasm, they just stay out in the back bedroom, sort of thing, and they can't influence us at that point. But anyway, here they come here to Gennezano with us, and all of a sudden they find themselves getting fried, and it's like back home in point holding groups. They can put up with it. How often are we on the table? Once every 4 weeks or something. And it's like being in a house where the roof leaks. You can put up with it, once every 4 weeks. But here, it's it's getting pretty heavy on them. Now, in my opinion, like there's no need for these entities to fry for hour on end. And
on the entity guidebooks, this place is sort of marked with like a skull and crossbones.
Yeah.
Keep away, don't go there.
Yeah. But getting back to this lodgerite or this house guest. Let's say you'd had a house guest for 500 years, and all of a sudden you asked him to leave. Well, you can imagine how he's going to feel, right? He's going to say, "What have I done? What's going on?" And that's the way they feel here, and it's like. So what I'm putting in a little word for the entities. It's like a little bit of explanation to them is going to go a long way, right? A lot of them, all they need is a little bit of direction. And so this is what I've done. Like several days ago, like there was Christopher and I working on Janus, and we had 4 separate, distinct, identifiable entities come through, just bang, 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 bang. And 2 of them left with a decree, and the other 2, I talked to them, and I said, listen, that entity, I talked out loud. Now, I've since found you don't need to talk out loud to them. They understand just as well if you do it mentally, all right? And I just said, look, that entity that's experiencing some discomfort in Janus's body, well, they do experience discomfort, I said, Janus is undergoing some reconstruction here, and you're going to have to leave. However, a better place has been prepared for you. And you see those bright lights there? They're your guides. Because this is true. They do see their guides as a bright light. Sometimes only one light, and sometimes they feel it more than they see it. But they know what you're talking about. And sometimes these bright lights, they've been there all this time, and they're scared of them even. So they have to know that these bright lights are their friends. They say, so these bright lights are your friends. They're your guides. And they can explain to you about what you're going through right now. Like, I can't remember. One of Janus he says, I want recognition, and that's, sometimes it's one dinky little thing why they hang around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's like a broken record, they just keep on going over the same thing. I want recognition. And I said, well, those guides will help you with the recognition that you're looking for. And then I said, are you ready to go? I got the feeling that the soul was, and I said, okay. I still had one free hand in this point holding. I said, I'm going to count to 3, give you a boost of energy, and then you go with those lights. 1, 2, 3. And Janus just started laughing. He went straight to enthusiasm. He said, this is too easy, and then we had 4 of them just go bang, 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 bang. And then after he got rid of those entities, he started processing about 8 or 9 different word patterns. See, once those entities are out of the way, then we can get into our stuff. But so long as they're there, it's hard. This is my experience. It's hard to get into my stuff. Okay, so here's my little word for the entities, okay? And it doesn't matter if you're the person on the table or if you're a point holder. If you sense, that the entity's there's the vibration, there's the word patterns like I want to get out or I'm going to die, because they're terrified. You've asked them, you're frying them, and they realise they're going to have to leave. The game's up, But as soon as you realise that there could be an entity there, just mentally say, the soul in X's body, or the entity in X's body, that's experiencing discomfort there, it's time to go. Follow the lights. They're your friends. They'll explain everything. And then if you've got both hands that are tied up, you can't do the clap bit, you just say, I'm going to count to 3 and exhale, and that'll give you a boost of energy, and you follow those lights. And you go 1, 2, 3, like that. Okay? And, if nothing happens, well, chances are there wasn't an entity there. But if there was an entity there, then, look, I've done it probably 8 or 9 times in the last few days, and it works. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Just in line with that, I've often found that sometimes when you're having trouble getting the person to intensify, to bring it up in the old-fashioned way that we get rid of entities with that decree thing, sometimes it's helpful for the person on the table to actually give it permission to leave, because in some level or another they're holding it there, or they may have their own fear of not having that entity and have an empty space there. So if the person on the table just gives it permission to go, that helps.
Yeah. Anything that the person on the table can if they sense to do that's good. Even down to the point of forgiving them. Like, there's so many reasons why entities hang around us, and sometimes all they really want is for us to forgive them. It's a dinky thing, right? But like if you're on the table and you say, look, I forgive you, and away they go.
Is Nolene here? Has anybody seen Nolene? Tana, would you like to come and talk about what you saw there with regard to souls hanging on with Nolene this afternoon? You were there. Oh, I only saw the one that we reabsorbed one. Yeah. Was there another one?
There was plenty.
Okay, but talk about the one that we reabsorbed.
Okay.
Yes.
Is Nolene here at all? Has she gone into a room? Okay. What was happening was, you remember Nolene came up the other day and she was talking about she'd had this miscarriage and no one had believed her, and she'd gone through the experience and she felt really drawn to this black void. Do you remember that? Yeah. Well, she had a similar experience today where she went back into the black void and she had a word pattern going, nobody's hearing me, and she felt as if it was echoing, like she was in a tube and it was echoing out, and she saw this black void happening. And she went back, what do you call those sessions that she had? Primal. She had some primal therapy sessions some years ago where her... at the same time she was having these sessions, I think it was a sister that was pregnant. Her niece was pregnant, and she was pregnant with twins, which had been happening for 5 generations in their family. There had been 5 generations where they'd all had twins or been pregnant with twins, and it always come out that there was only one that survived. The other one would starve. Yeah,
It would starve in the womb and get reabsorbed.
Yeah, this is amazing. I never knew that it happened. That if there was twins there and one was starving, then it would be reabsorbed through the placenta and go into the twin that was that was still surviving there and living. So what had happened was, in this primal session that she was doing, she re-experienced how she was in the womb and she saw this other being there as well, and she realised that she had a twin brother there as well. And that he was starving and he didn't survive, and he actually moved through the placenta and into her body, so the spirit and everything went into her. And so at the same time that she's re-experiencing this in the primal session, her niece is going through the pregnancy with these 2 twins. And for 5 generations, as I was saying before, it had happened that one of the twins would starve and die. But this time, I think because of the consciousness change probably that she went through in this primal session, the twins, they both survived this time. So Nolene was going back through this, and she was pretty puzzled by it, and we were both sort of going, this is pretty incredible. She didn't really know about this beforehand, and she was just re-experiencing this black void, which was a real block for her. And we called Doug over, and she went through the experience of her being in the womb and reliving her brother dying and going into her, and that's when she really felt this black void. So that's where it all came from, and we released the entity, and she felt so peaceful after that and so full of energy. She had word patterns of, I'm so tired, I can't stand it anymore, I can't cope, and all that sort of thing, and it just sort of lifted off her. And she was full of peace and vitality and energy after that, so that was good.
It was quite an amazing thing to see, because frankly I didn't know that this was possible either. You're all following this? I mean, she had a twin and a twin brother, and this twin brother apparently did die while they were in the womb together, and apparently, I guess, got reabsorbed, and she picked up on the entity level, she picked up the soul of this twin brother, and had been carrying it with her for, till now. Anything else on that?
No, that's it.
Makes you wonder about a lot of things there, Jan. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. No matter how long you do body electronics, you always run across new and unusual circumstances. That was kind of an interesting one to see. We've had a lot of, obviously, a tremendous amount of entity releases here, where on the one hand, the vast majority of the entities that have been released have basically been thought forms, as opposed to actual human intelligences. But I think there's some things you all want to consider here. Obviously, we've seen people who have had little souls released that had been fetuses that were terminated. This is something that a number of people here have gone through. So we consider that a lot of people here have that in in the past, and there's obviously a number of people that have already dealt with that in the last couple of weeks here. We've also seen situations with miscarriages. Something I would point out here, many women have had miscarriages without knowing that they'd miscarried, because you also have situations where women get pregnant and they miscarry within, maybe the first few weeks or month. So just consider that at the moment, once conception has occurred, it is quite possible from that point onward to pick up that intelligence. So the thing to realize is there's probably an awful lot more. Tana? Well, I'm basically saying that there's a lot of women that have had early miscarriages where they didn't even know they didn't even know they were pregnant, didn't even know that they'd miscarried. This is actually a far more common thing than most people realize. I mean, probably, I would guess that probably at least 20 or 30% of the women here have probably had miscarriages, and possibly not known that they've had the miscarriages. It's a lot more common than people realize. And if you consider that the intelligence is going to be linked with that developing body right from the moment of conception, then it doesn't have to be a miscarriage months and months and months into the pregnancy. It could be a matter of just a week or two into the pregnancy, and it'd be a very, very simple matter for that little soul to still be there in that woman's body, perhaps for a very, very long time. Consider also that in cases of either abortion or miscarriage, that little soul has chosen that particular woman to be its mother. So when you think about it that way, this is not just like, well, you happen to be in the operating room under anesthesia when somebody dies down the hallway, somebody that you've never met and don't have any connection with and just happens to have a similar word pattern. This is a little soul that already is very, very drawn to that mother. So if you start to look at it this way, what is the likelihood when you have a miscarriage or an abortion, what is the likelihood that that little soul is still going to be hanging around in that woman's energy field? I'm not going to tell you it's 100%, but I'll bet you it's pretty close. I'll bet you that you're going to find that this is a very, very common thing. So when you start to put some of these things together, you realize that there's probably a lot more people or a lot more women that are carrying around these little souls than realize it. And you're going to start to see, I think we seem to be on a bit of a roll in this area here at this seminar for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, but I think we're going to see some more stuff. Jan, come on up.
I haven't worked with a lot of people, but in the healing that I was talking about when we first came, most of the women that had a problem in that area, and there were entities to be released. But I was also going to say that if any woman has had a loop for contraception, when the conception takes place, it's in the fallopian tube, and there's a conception in the tube, and then you have the irritation of the loop in the uterus, and often there's, in my experience, there were bits and pieces that I didn't really take an awful lot of notice of at the time, but in latter years realised that I had probably had several miscarriages, and we don't know.
This is what you would the loop would sometimes be referred to as either a coil or an IUD.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So we don't know how that affects us, and I remember talking in the past that I'm sure that I had miscarried on odd occasions, and so some of the women that we dealt with were not aware that they had miscarried. This is recently when we were doing the healing in the last few months, and entities were released around that. So we really don't know what we're carrying quite often.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just so that everybody who's ever had an IUD doesn't think, that they've got a lot of entities around them. It can happen just that the way that Doug's been talking about, and mental blank. What's your name? Anyway, forgotten your name. Jan. Just going to say Jan. Jan's talking, but also sometimes the energy of the new soul does not move in to the the uterus of the woman, until sometimes several months later. Sometimes you can see, like when a pregnant woman takes on that beautiful glow, that she's shining and radiant. She's actually getting it's her own aura plus the aura of the new soul plus all the helpers of the new soul, and it's like that usually can be a bit of an indication when actually that energy has moved in to the woman. It can take place right back there at conception, but not necessarily. And of course, then the other thing to consider is that, say the woman might have had several abortions, but then she falls pregnant, and it could have been that same soul 7 times that tried to come in, and even though sometimes the soul might have decided to come in as and you might know it as a female fetus or a male fetus. That doesn't matter all that much sometimes. It could be that finally on the 7th time that new soul was successful and was able to incarnate. So, there's no need for a big guilt trip sometimes about abortions. So long as the contract has been filled sometime down the road, it's okay.
Yes, Doug, just talking about entities, one important concept I think is the free will of the entities. And where it crosses the line and starts to take the free will of the person on the table away, that is where I see that the decree that John has given us is mostly appropriate. Before that time, I see that talking with them as any other human being, someone's aunt or uncle or grandfather or whatever, is appropriate to actually talk them, to actually go to the light of their own free will. And it's been my experience that's far better, and that the decree really is an exorcism because it removes the free will of the entity to hang around.
The thing to realize here, Neil, is that the entity is in a state of great confusion. It's entrapped in your auric field by its own resistances, and for all intents and purposes, it has no free will. So if you're concerned about violating the free will of the entity, it's not really much of an issue here because the entity is in such a state of total reaction and total enmeshment into your auric field that it has no choice in the matter one way or another. When you send that entity onto the light of God, you're in no way harming it. You're performing the greatest of services to that entity.
That's right.
You're freeing it up. So don't delude yourself into thinking that there's any violation of free agency taking place with respect to the entity, because there's no shred of free agency left to be violated. It's stuck in the auric field.
That's right.
Yes, in some instances you can talk to the entity and convince it to leave, but in other instances it has no idea that it's even in someone else's body. It thinks it's in its own body. But the bottom line is, no matter how you slice it, that entity is not benefiting from being in your auric field. It needs to get on and get recycled and come back down in its own body so it can progress. And you need to free yourself from that entity so that you can continue to progress. So
that's the way
the problem with doing the decree prematurely is essentially that it's ineffective because things are not really ready to go yet. And the other thing to consider here is that no matter how many entities you send to the light, if that's all we ever do, we're not really getting anywhere because we're still leaving the holes in the aura because we haven't changed consciousness. I notice a lot of people in the point holding sessions, they'll get rid of an entity and then they don't do anything after that. They don't keep. I mean, for example, if you get rid of an entity on a particular word pattern, once the entity's gone, you're only like a small part of the way there. You still have to deal with all the resistance that goes with that word pattern. You have to deal with the emotions that are locked in there, the memories that are locked in there. There's still quite a bit to do there. And I do notice that a lot of people, that once the entity's gone, they seem to kind of lose interest in that area and they move on to something else. And the thing to realize is that you haven't really accomplished all that much because there's still a hole in the aura there.
Yeah, it's my experience that the thought forms are not all that malevolent, but their action is malevolent. But if you converse with them, they can see, that they're not getting anywhere.
See, the thing to realize here is this: there will be entities that will appear to be quite malevolent or quite vicious and hostile and all the rest. There will be others that will basically be just like you and me in terms of their programming. It's just like a person's reactive patterns. One person's reactive patterns might make them some sort of, psycho axe murderer, and somebody else's reactive patterns might just turn them into an investment banker. I mean, it's just a question of what their, what the patterns are. But the bottom line is they're still patterns. They're still programming. There's still patterns of resistance, and whether the patterns of resistance that are there are within the social norm or grossly outside of the social norm, in either case it's still reaction. Do you see what I mean? It's like
I agree totally.
we can look at programming. We can look at the fact that people have programming, and some people will say, well, there's good programming and bad programming. And yeah, I would agree with that on some level, but ultimately, whether your programming makes you wash the dishes or whether your programming makes you leave your dishes for somebody else to wash, in either case, if it's programming, there's no free agency there. And in either case, really, you need to overcome that programming so that you can actually make your choices.
And that's what the person on the table has done.
Well,
and therefore the entity needs to go.
They haven't done it yet. If you think about it this way, if you overcame your resistance first, then that in and of itself would do what to the hole in the aura? I mean, what would happen if you totally overcame your resistance in a given area? The hole in the aura is going to change up, and at that point the entity is actually ejected. I mean, that's why we have entities hovering around in the room right now, because there's entities that have been ejected through a change of consciousness rather than by a decree. The decree doesn't change consciousness. The decree simply sends the entity to the light, right? It doesn't change consciousness. It doesn't deal with the hole in the aura. When a person changes consciousness, which often happens without any awareness of the entity involvement that's there, the moment that consciousness is changed and the resistance is overcome, the hole in the aura closes right up, and it will remain closed unless the person falls back into that same pattern by making the same judgment all over again. It'll remain closed. And once that hole in the aura is closed, there is no longer a space for the entity, and it's out of your body just like that. I mean, how many of you holding points have felt cold winds just go by spontaneously? How many have felt that here? Okay? That's entities leaving most of the time. Sometimes it's just the windows open, but a lot of times that's entities leaving, even though there was no decree given, because what's happened is quite simple. The person's changed consciousness. This is why it's very important at the end of the day to kind of clean up the hall, send things on to the light. Or just in general, when you're holding points and you feel a cold wind, just give a little decree, whatever entity that was that just zipped by there, onto the light of God. I mean, do the decree there, because you're going to find that there are lots of entities that are going to pop out simply by a person overcoming their resistances.
So then, what you're saying then is that it's always the case that you would have to make the decree.
No, not at all. Like I just said, there's plenty of times where you could have a pattern of resistance, Neil, right? You could be going back through certain word patterns and emotional patterns. You could be in a memory. If you make a change of consciousness, what's going to happen to the hole in the aura in that area?
Yeah, it's all healed.
It's closed right up. So what happens to the entity that would be there?
There's no...
It's gone. Is a decree necessary then?
No.
Well, let me put it this way. Is a decree necessary for the entity to leave you?
In that situation...
No, it's already gone. You've closed up the hole in the aura just by changing consciousness. What is the purpose of the decree then in that case? It's to send the entity... It's not for your benefit any longer. You've already dealt with things. You've already made the change of consciousness. Your hole in the aura is already closed. In that case, the decree is solely for the benefit of the entity. Do y'all see this?
Yeah.
Okay.
But in that situation where the entity may not be malevolent, you're taking away their free agency.
It has
to
none.
go to the light of themselves.
It has none, Neil. It doesn't know the way. It's lost and confused.
But being around here, they progress and see some of the light.
You're mistaken.
You're
Okay? The entity is very, very lost and confused, Neil. It doesn't know where it is. It doesn't know. It's like Peter was saying, this is something that may have been a house guest for 500 years. Okay? It doesn't know how to take care of itself.
Well, I haven't had that experience.
If you're out here hiking around in the woods, right? And you find like a lost child out there, are you violating that child's free agency by picking it up and bringing it back to civilization?
Certainly not, but there's a gradation between the lost child and the demon.
Yeah, the lost child has a little bit more sense, probably.
No, but there is, there's entities in the middle there somewhere.
But
really, their malevolence is not bad.
It's got nothing to do. You're totally missing the point here, Neil. It's got nothing to do with malevolence. Whether the entity is an axe murderer or an investment banker is of no relevance here. It's still an entity. It's still an intelligence that's not in its own body. And if it's going to have any hope of progressing, it's got to go back up to the light so that it has the opportunity to come down into its own body to progress. It's got nothing to do with the character of the entity. Okay? Good, bad, or ugly, it's still an entity. It still needs to get recycled, and it still needs to come down in its own body so it has a chance of progress. What's that?
It's the method that I'm talking about. That's not in dispute. It's the method. Either a decree where you take the free will away, or where you promote them to go to the light of their own free will. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, I feel like I'm going in circles here, Neil. Okay?
Just the thing that came to me in the last couple of days is, and it's just what you two are talking about, is that here we're creating a lot of spiritual refugees. That was the word that came in. Spiritual refugees. No place to go. And that's when, like you're saying, the decree at the end of the day, or for these people, that they just don't know where to go, then you just help them. They're displaced.
I just wanted to give an example of just how confused beings can be. I was once many years ago, giving counseling to a fellow, and during the counseling he cycled into his previous life. And in his previous life, this was before recreational drug taking, he was drugged and poisoned in some way by something in the country, by herbs or poisonous plants or something. But he was really thoroughly drugged and poisoned. And when he died and was buried, he was still in this drugged and poisoned condition. And he lay in that grave for decades. He lay there in the grave with the rotting and then worm-eaten and then totally disintegrated body, and he continued to exist, to be in that place for decades. And then they ran out of space in the graveyard, and so they bulldozed part of the graveyard and disturbed the old graves, and they disturbed his grave. And it was at that point that he came out of this drug-poisoned condition and picked up a new body. And that really brought home to me just how confused beings can be, especially if they die of drugs or poisoning. Goodness knows how long. Once you're out of the body, of course, there's no time or space. And so for this guy, there was no time or space, so he just existed there. And if the bulldozer hadn't disturbed his grave, he'd be there yet, in that grave in Ireland. So perhaps that gives you an idea of just how confused beings can be. And an entity, as Doug keeps saying, is even more confused because he's been hanging around with you for, in Ionis's case, 500 years, maybe a million years.
You figure anybody that hung around with any of us for 500 years would be awfully confused. Ian?
We're all confused. Just from Neil's point of view there, if you're looking, I was just sitting there trying to think about it, if you're looking at messing up our free will or the entity's free will, if we're using God's decree or a decree of an ascended master, then we're not really taking the responsibility, we're giving it to God. So I don't think we should have a problem with that because we're not making the decision.
Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to talk about, get back to the topic of terminations or abortions, because I have to disagree a bit with what was said, and that is that it doesn't really matter, because eventually that soul may come to you. Because when you have an abortion, it's a violation of a physical law. Now, I know that's not a very popular stance in this day and age, sorry. But there are higher and lower laws, and there are times when it may be appropriate to do that. If you consider maybe a situation where, because a woman was raped and the child is conceived without any love, and that child is already going to have 2 strikes against it, then maybe it would be appropriate. But the fact of the matter is that a woman is going to have to go back and deal with the physical laws of that abortion, which are going to include all the anesthesia, the possibility that the soul has attached itself to her, the possibility of any of our own suppressed trauma, word patterns, emotion patterns, etc. And the fact is that when you have an abortion, you are denying a soul a right to a body. Now, I'm not here to judge anybody, because I myself have had this experience, and I know personally what I've had to go through to come back to get. I know what I've done to get through it, or at least in part. There have been some people that have had the experience of having a soul attached. When I first came to this program, I had in both eyes squared off autonomic nerve wreath, which indicates a death wish, and I can say in both eyes, and I can say that had a great deal to do with that, and with a soul being attached to me, and which I was able to release and work through. And now, if you look in my eyes, you just see a slim vestige of the autonomic nerve wreath squared off. No sin or no deviation from physical law is ever too great to overcome. And the way that we can overcome this type of situation is through service to mankind, and possibly for a woman by eventually having a child and allowing the child to come through her. So, I'm not here to, beat you over the head, but just we need to be aware of what we're doing. I'm just afraid that we spend a lot of time justifying our actions with what we think are higher principles and laws, when in fact we just simply aren't being responsible for what we're doing.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was just wondering why a soul will actually decide to attach itself to a body, knowing that you're being raped. You don't really want that soul. I don't know.
There's a couple things to consider here, Sama. When we're out of a body, in between incarnations, we see things a bit more clearly than we see them when we're in the midst of it. We're certainly not in an ascended state. We certainly have a lot of reactive patterns. We certainly are still dealing with many, many resistances. Yet all the same, there's often the clarity to recognize that a certain body or a certain life experience might be appropriate for our growth. And so a soul might choose to come into a body that was a very crippled body, or it might choose to come into a family where there was a lot of violence, or any of a number of other situations. But there's another thing that I think gets overlooked here. A lot of people will make the statement that we, myself included, that we choose, say we choose our parents, we choose our circumstances. That's true on the one hand, quite true, but it's not as simple as people imagine it. The choice to come into a certain body, it's not a single choice. It's not just the choice of, I'll take that one. Because what it really is it's the cumulative result of all of our previous choices down through the ages. Do you follow me? The parameters in which we're capable of making a choice, as far as what body we're gonna get, are going to be severely limited in most cases, based on all of our previous choices and all of our previous transgressions. And so the thing about it is there will be certain situations where that given soul has, as a result of all their previous choices, very, very, very little freedom of activity left, or very, very little, shall we say, mobility left in terms of the choices they can make. And in some instances, it basically comes down to the lords of karma pretty much saying, get down there in that body. Because as a result of the choices that have been made previously, there's virtually no choice left. The other thing too, Sama, is there will be some souls that are so, shall we say, they recognize that that even in the most abject of all circumstances, the gift of life is very precious. And they'll recognize through perhaps eons of time spent since their last embodiment, they will recognize that it's very, very difficult to make progress in that out-of-body state. And as terrible as the circumstance they're going to be born into may seem to us here, from their perspective up there, perhaps they're happy just to get another chance in a body. Perhaps they're happy just to have the opportunity to go into a body. Now, you take a little soul that's born into a body that was conceived in violence. Okay, no love whatsoever between the parents. Let's just say it was a case of a rape. That little soul, as with all little souls, is going to have the energy of the parents at the moment of conception impressed upon it. That's a very, very strong energy pattern there, where, the state of the mind of the woman being raped is obviously going to be, in most cases, a pretty tremendous amount of resistance there. The state of the mind of the man doing the raping is obviously not going to be a whole lot better. There's going to be a tremendous amount of resistance there in both cases. So that little soul is going to have an awful lot of stuff on its plate. It's going to have an awful lot of stuff that it's going to have to work through, above and beyond the genetic stuff from each parent and its own soul level stuff and whatever entity level stuff you're going to have there. And yet, be that as it may, there will be souls that will say, I'll take a body, any body, because I've got a mission to fulfill, I've got something that I need to do, and I'll take my chances. So does that... Okay. We're... Okay, if we could get the projector there. Tessa? You want them going or not going? Can somebody turn the fans up a bit? Okay. The main thing we want to see in this slide is going to be all these big blue blotches up in the brain area here in the sclera. Are you able to see these? Okay. Now, John, you mentioned something one time a little while back that I've still been a little bit unclear on. I believe you said in some of the slides you've seen of this that this was like chemical poisoning, or...
You will find on people who live around cane fields these tremendous blue blotches here, which are chemical poisoning, which are also usually associated with what we call pathological polychromia, where the parts of the iris of the eye are just totally black on a kind of a pigment overlay on top of the brown chromatophores. And we've seen this in lots of small children, like in the cane fields of Hawaii and so on. Now this is where this picture was taken, and it's where the children are quite ill, and nobody knows what's wrong with them, but we do know that they're suffering terribly from chemical poisoning from the cane fields.
Okay. Polychromia?
This is not pathological polychromia. It's where the black of the iris of the eye is. And it's just a black overlay on top of the brown chromatophores.
Okay, next slide there. Okay, is this going to be a left eye or a right eye? Okay, it's going to be a left eye. You see the blue blotch out in this area? What's this going to indicate here? Okay, is it going to be heart or thymus? Okay, it's going to be the heart because it's out laterally. This will be a left eye, so this is going to be the lateral part of the sclera. The nose is going to be over there somewhere, so this is going to be problems with the heart out in this area. You notice this indicating line coming in towards the heart right here? And then you notice this vertical one going right up and down like that? What's this going to indicate? Okay, electric shock that has been sustained in the body.
You'll also find that associated with insulin shock and sometimes very, very severe emotional shock.
Okay, next slide. Okay, here we just have some...
if we can get that in clearer, there should be...
Try the other one, and the other wheel a little bit in front of that, the front right corner of the projector.
That's about right there.
Yeah. What we'll have here will be some degeneration lines. Now, if you look at this right here, what area is this going to be right here? Okay, we'll be dealing with the back area here. Remember, the spine is always going to be in your medial inferior quadrant of the eye. So this is going to be a degeneration line in the back area. We've also got a degeneration line stretching clear up over in that direction. Okay, next slide. Oh, much better. Okay, so this will be your degeneration line in through the back area. One of the things that you'll want to pay particular attention to is which areas this will come in closest to the back, like for example, or closest to the iris. Like for example, it dips close in right in this area, and again up in that area. So you'd follow those into perhaps the upper and lower portions of the spine. Okay, let's hit the next one, John.
Come back one, if you would please, just for a moment. The part here coming in from the heart area and down through this particular degeneration line going down into the feet area, you'll find right at the bottom of there a little blue blotch, right at the very bottom, Doug, right there, down further, right there. See that blue blotch there? Now down in the feet area, where you find this, you find lack of circulation, and you'll find a blue blotch right down there at just short of 6 o'clock. And that will indicate that there's no circulation down into the feet and legs. And here is where you have the symptoms begin with a person not able to walk very far, with numbness in the feet, pain in the knees, and gradually moving into the calf muscles. And so sometimes people who have this particular line, in this particular, Doug, if you could just indicate that, please, who have this particular line, which would be lateral from the iris, which would indicate this would be the front of the body. This would indicate that possibly the blood vessels are pretty well clogged up, and you need a very good cleaning out, which we've gone through with you.
Okay, next slide. Okay, we've got ourselves a right eye here, and again, you'll have another degeneration line here. But notice in particular this indicating line going very, very close into the pupil and how it goes, or into the iris, and how you've got this, sort of big thing poking in right here. This could certainly be the thymus area, which can show up over in this side of the chart. And notice also this indicating line down in this area, where it's very, very convoluted right in through here. And you've got this kind of crossing right there. You'll remember whenever you get the blood vessels crossing like that, this is showing some sort of metabolic breakdown in the corresponding area of the body. So check out this area right there. You've also got a fairly heavy degeneration line over in this area, with an indicating line coming in right here and connecting down into this area. Okay, next slide. That's the same eye. Okay, that's just a same eye we were just looking at with the same indicating line coming in here, the cross right there, and you follow it down through here, and you notice how you have these very, very large enclosures there, where typically when you're dealing with an enclosure like that, you are going to have some type of tumor situation in the body, quite likely. If not, you're certainly going to have quite a problem in that area. And you've got a number of different enclosures that you'll find in this area. So that whole area of the body is going to be suspect. Sama?
While we were working, I got a bit confused about enclosures because I heard some people talking about blood vessels crossing over other blood vessels and therefore making it not an enclosure. Can you clarify exactly what?
Well, for example, this area right here would be an enclosure because it's completely surrounded by the blood vessels.
One continuous blood vessel in somewhat of a circular motion.
Man.
It's not blood vessels crossing blood vessels in this case. It's a continual flow of blood in a circular motion.
Right around like that. This will be an example of an enclosure.
And that will always be an indication of some sort of breakdown. You may not have a spreading tumor, but you'll have a problem in that area. And that whole area will be like a segment. So a whole segment of the eye will be affected by it.
This whole section right in through there of the eye. This right here, that would appear to be an enclosure as well because it does go all the way around like that. So that would appear to be an enclosure as well.
That looks like a cross blood vessel there, Doug.
You think that's at different levels right there?
I think that's cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What John's referring to is out in the iris, out in the sclera, you'll often have blood vessels that are at different depths, different layers of blood vessels, and so sometimes it's a little bit tough to see. And I think what John is seeing here is that right in this area, you're not really dealing with a continuous blood vessel. You're dealing with several blood vessels that are crossing over each other at slightly different depths. Whereas in this case, it's quite clearly all at the same depth, and it is one continuous blood flow all the way around this loop right here. Okay, next slide. Okay, one thing I would pay close attention to here is this indicating line coming in this area and forming this enclosure right here, this kind of loop right around like that, where that's going to be quite a significant problem right there. This enclosure on the end of the indicating line. Okay. Excuse me. You're asking if the significance of an enclosure on the end of an indicating line as opposed to not on the end of an indicating line? Okay, I'm not entirely certain on that one. John?
If you have an enclosure, you've got a problem.
Okay, and it's not any more serious or any less serious if you've got the indicating line coming into it?
The one thing is, the closer it is to the iris, that means that correspondingly, the closer it is to the area of the pupil, like zone 1 and 2 would probably be indicated there.
Okay. Y'all have that? I mean, basically, the closer in the enclosure is towards the iris itself, it'll correspond to something further in the iris, like in this case, something perhaps in this area would be indicated. Okay, next one.
On this particular slide, according to Dr. Stu Wheelwright, if you have a little blotch like that, that's kind of red, and got blood vessels going out all around it, you follow that on in here, and you got some problems in here. Now, sometimes this can be parasite related. Now, if you look through here, follow that straight in toward the pupil, you do have some problems, but they go right in here. See that? And see the color change right here. And wherever you have a color change, you've got a problem. I'm not saying this is cancer, but I'm saying that this is parasite. And there are some people who believe very firmly that all cancers are parasite related. So I just want to bring that to your attention.
Okay, next slide. Okay, here you're going to have quite a tie-in here, because you've got this one. You've got an indicating line up here that's perhaps in the pituitary area. You'll notice the degeneration line coming down through here, where you've got a series of indicating lines coming in through here that may well be your thyroid and thymus, perhaps. And you've got quite a tie-in going around down there. Can't quite see where this is coming in right there, but you've got a number of things there.
On this side, you have it coming all the way down here likewise. So basically, the whole body is in a stress situation, tying in all the indicating lines, and you have a lot of work to do on this person. There's one thing extremely significant here I want you to take note of. And it's this little, see that little jigger right here coming in off of the degeneration line? It's coming in right at 7 o'clock in what we call the right iris. You follow that on in, and you've got a serious pancreatic problem right in here. And this whole area will be suspect. But primarily, you'll see when you see this, you know that you have a serious pancreatic problem that needs attention.
Doc, could you go a bit deeply into this idea of tie-ins and really make it in such a way that we can really understand what relationship is going on between the different organs which are tying in?
My understanding is that back before my time in body electronics, I suppose maybe 12 or 15 years ago, that there was a woman named Loretta Flora in Indiana.
Rossville,
Indiana. And she happened to notice that if you had what we're calling a tie-in, which will be a series of indicating lines joined by a common degeneration line, this woman noticed that oftentimes if you held all of the different points on the tie-in and the person was able to work through the trauma that involved all of those those organs or glands, that the tie-in would disappear. You'd still have the indicating lines coming in, but you'd often manage to get the degeneration line, which was the that component of the tie-in, to dissolve or disappear. Now, what John has noticed over the years is this: if, for example, say this is a pituitary thyroid thymus tie-in, for example, the pituitary is going to be associated with what emotion? Okay, pain. The thyroid with anger, and the thymus with fear. So what you're going to be looking at here is a series of traumas, or shall we say a reactive pattern that's been perpetuated in a series of traumas that's going to involve the simultaneous suppression of those three emotions: the pain, the anger, and the fear. And one of the things that John's worked out over the years and is now teaching in the sclerology 2-day course that I guess we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks. Fifth week, is that you can look at a lot of these different types of tie-ins, and you can oftentimes tell a lot of things about the psychological state of the individual, some of the patterns that individual is going to have. And what you'll also look at there is not just the what the tie-in is, but it'll be quite significant whether it's in the left eye or the right eye, whether it's pertaining to male energies or whether it's pertaining to female energies. And there's I don't think we're going to really go into the details on this now because we've got a lot of other things to cover, but you can tell a tremendous amount about the person's psychological state from the various tie-ins that are there. And this concept, which John has been much more specific on in the sclerology course, was quite new to me just 3 or 4 months ago, or at least at that depth and being that specific. And I found it very, very exciting. When I first heard it at the end of September in Auckland, and I've since that time been kind of dabbling in it and looking at eyes, particularly of people that I already know fairly well, and I found it to be very, very helpful in figuring a few things out. Okay, next slide here. Okay, I think that's the same. Is that the same eye again?
Same eye.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at the enclosure, Doug. Right there at 4 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you. We've got the enclosure right in this area at around 4 o'clock. Y'all see that?
Follow it in now.
You'll notice also that this, does kind of dent right in that area. If you follow that right into the center of the pupil, you've got this pigment spot right in this area here. Looks to me like you've got a bit of waviness and darkness in the fiber structure there as well.
The main part I want to show you is the indentation of the autonomic nerve wreath, which is swollen and heavy right through here. And this will show you that you really have a serious problem wherever you have your swollen fibers. And that's it right in here. You see how if you follow this around, you run across this color change. And if you follow this color change and follow this right on out to the enclosure here, this enclosure will envelop this particular area very accurately there. And then you have to look very carefully under a lot of the catarrhal effect. But all of these are swollen fibers, and you got some problems. And I think we're into what we call a Medusa effect, because you don't just have the asparagus effect, which you'll remember. You have a real heavy-duty Medusa effect, where you have a number of swollen fibers surrounding darker areas. Here's a dark area, dark area, dark area, a little dark hole here, and you have to look at your 15 power to really see how dangerous these things are, because it looks like we have a whole lot of real serious problems, which would be in the upper part of the back area. And the person has pain all the time, and you're wondering why they have pain, muscle tension and problems. Okay. So please keep this in mind. This is extremely important. You got that? Okay, those little enclosures are very deadly when you start really looking at the breakdown that the person has in the body. So please follow this on through. Okay.
Okay, next slide. Okay, we've got more of these big blue blotches or blue splotches up here in the brain area, which, as John has said, will be related a lot of times to your chemical poisoning from various things. Is this another cane field eye, or?
Yes, but you'll have the same effect with leukemia.
Okay. Okay, but y'all see what we've got here, these very, very dark blue blotches all up in the sclera, particularly up in the brain area. Okay, next. Sure thing.
Now, we've been referring to blue blotches, which are more in the brain area, and I had the impression that blue blotches all over the sclera would be more related to leukemia. Is there any way of whereby we can say, to a certain extent say that blue blotches, which are around the brain area, are more related to chemical poisoning than leukemia?
No. As far as I can tell, Sama, it's the same. But the thing is, with the blue blotches, you follow that into the areas that are indicated, and you find it in the lung problems, lung cancers and things like that. Also in the brain, you find it in brain problems. But just follow the indicating in from the blue blotches into the part of the body, and that will be the part of the body which will be affected.
So is this actual effect here, the blue blotches, which you can see with leukemia, is it also with something you can see with any kind of chemical poisoning, like pesticides and...
It can be. But what is the bottom line? What's the effect? Now, where you find a lot of these blue spots, they're very, very close to the iris, aren't they? this is going to affect down into the intestinal area, isn't it? And if the intestines are not functioning properly, as you have in Dr. Morishita's book, do you have that little booklet there, A Cure for Cancer by Dr. Morishita? You should have that in your Health and Human Mind handout. Now, on that material in there is such an important thing to understand, is that if the intestines are not functioning properly with the digestion and assimilation, then the blue spots are going to be characteristic, and you'll have all the signs of leukemia. Now, the same thing will happen if you're under a lot of toxic sprays and poisons. You'll have the same problem then. Okay? So the end result is the same. Ruth. Okay, just want to be up here. Okay, next.
Okay, next. Thank you. Okay, we've got some of the blue dots on the ends of the. I don't know if that's quite on the end of the indicating line, but we've got the blue dot on the end of the indicating line here, and some of the dots up in that area. I think that's just junk on the slide there, but we've got the dot right there and the dot right there. You'll remember from earlier on that if a person has 3 or more blue dots in each sclera, that's at the very least going to be a low-level leukemia. And if you look around a room of people such as this, you will find quite a number of people here in this room that will have the 3 or more blue dots in each eye. So this is a far more common situation than most people realize. And you'll remember a lot of the symptoms that are quite common here. You're going to have your extreme fatigue. You're going to have your bleeding gums, your tendency to bruise easily, perhaps even rectal bleeding, but certainly the bleeding gums, the easy bruising, and the extreme fatigue. And these are symptoms that are far more common than people realize, I think.
Now, from a psychological point of view, you take a look at a person with a lot of blue spots in their eyes, and of course their spleen, to one degree or another, will be affected. The person will be down at the level of apathy, pretty much, well, I can't do this and I can't do that. And they'll be thinking that way. They'll feel that way. The feelings will be overpowering. Now, you will find that the sicker the person becomes, they will have a reactive activity going on within their body which is seeking to survive. And like any other plant or animal, whenever there is a deep threat to the survival of a species, it will begin to reproduce. And so you will find that, like during war times, you'll have your war babies, and you'll have a tremendous baby boom, where people have collectively the drive to reproduce. And you'll find the same thing with people individually. When the body starts breaking down, the sex drive becomes very, very strong for a short time, at which time the body depletes itself entirely as it gets sicker and sicker and sicker. So one of the things that you must understand is that if you want to get your body well, the first thing you do is control your sex drive and maintain the strength within your body rather than deplete your resources, so to speak. And we find that a lot of people will find their resources fully depleted because their sex drive is so strong as they're dying slowly. And you'll see that a lot of people with the blue spots in the sclera, the sex drive will be very, very strong because the focus is on reproduction and survival. Thank you very much over there.
Ian? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here you're going to have quite a heavy indicating line coming into the heart area. Plus, you're going to have the vertical vessel there as well, which may actually, it's not really going quite down through there, but it still may be associated with the electric shock. But it's certainly quite a bit of stress on the heart there. And you notice it appears from here, at any rate, that we've got a bit of a fork right there, which is going to be a higher level of stress.
You will find here that a number of you had what we will call the enclosures in the heart area. And the heart enclosures, as you went through a lot of burning in the heart, these enclosures disappeared in the sclera. And you'll find that will happen. Now, if this happens to be in the left side of the eye, now I hope you all get this. If this happens to be on the left side, this will usually be inherited from the female side or mother's side of the family. And if it happens to be in the right sclera, it will indicate the persons will have their heart problem inherited from the father's side of the family. If it's in the right eye, this happens to be in the left eye.
Okay, next slide. Quite sure what we're looking for there.
Basically, the little lines, the
Yeah,
allergy lines.
We've got many of the allergy lines here, which John has pointed out in the past. All these very, very fine blood vessels in right up touching the iris all down through here.
Now take a look at the mess in the colon area.
And then you follow that in and you see quite a problem in there. And in particular, look at this very, very dark ring within inside zone 1 where you're now dealing with your stomach musculature. So your zone 1 ring is going to come out to about there. And then inside zone 1, you've got this stomach musculature situation there. Anything, John?
That's good.
Okay, next slide. Okay, this I believe is going to be your heart attack, where you've had the, you notice this kind of big red blotch out in this area.
This person checked himself out of the intensive care unit in the hospital and brought himself over to my house to have his points held on the heart. And you can see when I looked at him, he had a massive heart attack. They said, you can't leave the hospital as he was leaving the hospital. And look at look at the huge blotch of red. That indicates a severe heart attack. So please keep that in mind, okay?
The worse the red blotch out in this area, that's going to indicate a much higher degree of damage to the heart musculature from the heart attack. You'll see some people that will have a heart attack and be relatively fortunate in not sustaining massive damage to the heart, whereas other people after a heart attack will be pretty well incapacitated until that's able to heal up.
It might be wise to point out, in dealing with the heart attack, when you have a person on the table, you make darn good and sure their nutrients are high, especially their minerals, before you start working with them, because if they start cycling, when they're in the middle of pain, the pain will not diminish at all. So on this one here, now this of course is going to be in your which eye? The right eye. And you know good and well, the person had a good bit of damage. And if he's been unconscious, what is going to happen on the table when you hold his points? He's going to go back to unconsciousness again. I've had people go home after they have cycled, take a bunch of minerals, and then go unconscious. And people call you on the phone and say, "Look what you've done here to my father," or "Look what you've done to my husband." And I say, "Don't worry. Things are just fine. He just took his minerals. He's just back through going back through the healing crisis on that." But you'd better know what you're doing if you're going to say that to somebody. Just tell him to keep him down, go back and hold a hard point, and tell him where the hard point is, and just hold that. He'll be fine, and he will be fine. But I'll tell you, it's a little scary for people who don't understand what they're working with the first few times.
Okay, next slide. Nice to have John back, isn't it?
I really never left.
Okay, we've got a tie-in situation up here with a number of these indicating lines, and you've actually got tie-ins at a couple of different levels. But also bear in mind here we've got some enclosures right in this area. We've got one right in here. Got another enclosure going right around like that. Okay.
Bottom line here is a pineal pituitary thyroid tie-in. And here's where you would have another tie-in going over to about 1 o'clock in the medulla area. And you figure that one in too. And you're going to have a lot of work to do here on this person by holding all of the points together, as Doug has mentioned, until you come to a throbbing, pulsing activity where they all pulse simultaneously, and if the person did it right, they will go back through the suppressed pain, the suppressed enthusiasm, the suppressed anger, and whatever else was suppressed, and they'll go back through all of that, and they re-experience it all, at which time the much of the what we call the degeneration line disappears entirely.
When about a couple months ago, when we were in Hamilton at Ian's house, we encountered a tie-in that went pretty well all the way around the eye, and if I remember right, I don't think you were. Did you see it, Ian? How many things were on that? Was it 10 or 11? It was at least. I'd say it was at least 10 different organs or glands all on the same tie-in there on one person.
Was this a minister's wife? But there must be a lot of stress in that person's life where he's living everyone else's song and dance.
I do understand with the tie-ins that we have to hold the points simultaneously. But if you actually find yourself in a situation where you don't have enough people to hold those points simultaneously, despite all efforts, can you then say pick 2 or 3 points and try to hold and then carry on, or will it just be a waste of time?
It's never a waste of time. But the thing is what you want to do is to stimulate the organ areas so that you will be able to get the full emotion out. Because now remember, anything can cause anything. And just by holding the pineal point, which I have seen, the entire, what we would call the degeneration line disappears. Just by holding one point. Because that one point hologrammically works throughout the entire body.
Just remember, one of the very nature of a hologram is that the whole is contained in every single little part. I mean, that's just basically what a hologram is by definition. Okay, next slide.
Enclosure.
Okay. Right there.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. What are we going to do for this person here? It's a glass eye.
Next.
See, if they were going to assume the virtue, they could have had a better constitution in their glass eye. Okay, if you look on this one, I would say one thing you'd want to pay very close attention to is this kind of little crossbow effect right here, where you've got the degeneration line crossed by the indicating line that's coming right across and touching the iris. And if you follow that in there, you're certainly going to see some areas where you've got some real problems right in through here. But you'll notice that cross right there, and you'll notice how it is.
Take the pointer and go from the enclosure and go right in toward the pupil.
Right there?
No, from the other one, the other enclosure there, the bigger one up there.
This one right here? Or way up here?
This one.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now follow that right in. Now, as you follow that right in, go back there again. As you follow that right in very carefully toward the center of the pupil, right in, what do you get right there?
You get a lot of swollen fibers. Oh, you get these swollen fibers that are kind of around that pigment spot right in through here.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
right
where's your big enclosure out in the iris? Or in the sclera?
Right out in here.
You're right. And you got another little one? A major one? Right? See this one right there?
It's right here.
No, up, right there.
Right there.
That is the worst of the lot.
Yeah.
Now see how that's a little round circle with a whole bunch of blood vessels going in and out of it?
Yeah, right there.
You all see that? That's the worst of the lot, and that you pay close attention to. You follow that right on in, you've got a mess in there, and that's where the fibers are. And you've got a whole mass of fibers through there, and it's a very, very bad situation. That would probably be in the thymus area, and it could go up into the thyroid area. The whole area is going to be affected. A person's esophagus may not be working, and they got perhaps a scratchy voice, because that esophagus is going to be there just about 8:45. So you got several areas in there that'll be affected.
Okay, next slide. jumping out at you there?
What's the main thing you see?
Well, it looks like an enclosure right here. It's a little bit iffy right there, though.
How about your allergy lines?
Oh, okay. Lots of the little allergy lines in through here.
Okay, and are those important? How does a body heal? From the inside out. So what's the very first thing you have to work with? Get the intestines cleared away so your digestion and assimilation is sound. And then the allergy lines disappear. So if you see allergy lines, you work very heavy on that person to get them going. Usually the liver will be involved when you see the allergy lines. Do you have a liver condition here?
Okay, next.
Do you have a liver condition here?
Yeah, it would look like up in this area there could certainly be some problems. So I would say yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next. Okay, some very obviously some enclosures up in this area and some very, very heavy indicating lines and degeneration lines, but obviously quite a clear enclosure right in this area with sort of an enclosure within an enclosure there. Well, you have both. I would say you have both there, and you've also got
what?
He was asking about blood vessels crossing because you've also got this very obvious X marks the spot right here that you'd certainly want to consider right in this area.
Very clearly here also, here's your cholesterol ring, your arcus senellus, and then your blue anemia ring on top of it. So you got a beautiful slide here to look at. But here's your enclosure, here's your enclosures, and you have to put a person on a very heavy program.
Okay, next slide. Okay, again, you're going to look at the indicating lines coming in, the degeneration line, and the tie-in situation right there. It looks to me like you have a bit of a blue blotch out in this area as well, which is going to reflex to what? Okay, it's going to be thymus because you are dealing medially there. This will be a left eye towards the nose.
Follow the enclosure there, Doug, and on the degeneration line.
Right here?
Yes, and follow that right directly into the eye. What do you have right there?
This right here, or
That's
the
right.
Yeah, that's right in there.
Right there. That's a black hole.
Yep.
And it's surrounded by your hollow, shall we say, your swollen fibers. Now that's major. See that little? You see it there? Okay. Now you do that every time you see an enclosure. Take it right into the center of the pupil, and you can see where it crosses right there. You can't miss that, can you? Okay.
Okay. Next slide. Now
This is a line way out in the heart area, and it's a very, very heavy line. See that? Now this is an aneurysm, where you see a very, very heavy blood vessel, where it's swollen. This is where you see people who have the aneurysms with these very, very heavy lines. And it's a very dangerous situation, and they will clear up. An aneurysm. It's like where you have a garden hose that's been blocked off, and then it swells up to where it's paper thin, and then it breaks and pops. And people die of aneurysms, especially in the aorta, the lower part of the heart, the aortic aneurysm they call it. They have aneurysms in the brain where you have a massive stroke and usually death when a person has a big blood vessel burst of this kind. But this is exceedingly dangerous when you find that in the eye. Don't take that lightly. Sama.
Will the positions of these blood vessels actually reflect the organs which are involved in those aneurysms? Can we determine the likely position of the organs involved in the aneurysm from the location of the blood vessel in the sclera?
Follow it right on into the iris. And that'll tell you the areas that are affected. You can't be too sure because of the organ placement will vary. But you can ascertain the general areas where you got the problem. And you treat the problem. You get the person on a lot of fruit to get the vitamin C from the fruit in there. You've got to get the person cleaned out with the enzymes and minerals and get that plaque buildup taken care of. And then, of course, your fatty materials that will be situated in there will be cleared out by your lipase and your lecithin and your flax oil. All of that needs to be considered.
Okay, next slide. Okay, what's this going to be right here? You all remember this, the hiatus or hiatal hernia right here? Fork right up at 12 o'clock. And we've gone over a couple of times the sit-up for that, so I think you're all familiar with that procedure. Okay, next slide. That'll be a little tough to read, huh?
This was a lady. She had a little bit of what they had is called it's on the cornea, and it was kind of like a little infection in there, and then it became an ulcerated cornea. And the doctor said, well, let's just take a little mucous membrane here from the edge of the iris and pull over it, and let's take it from the lower eyelid and pull over it, and that's what you get. She's totally blind now. And it's amazing what doctors will do.
What was the point? I mean, what were they trying to accomplish?
Just to put extra covering over the ulcer. So, I mean, it was just, rather than just healing the ulcer naturally, which they don't know how to do except with drugs, and that doesn't heal, that only suppresses. Anyway, she can't see.
Okay.
It hasn't been reversed. I believe it could be reversed. Next.
Next.
This is Carmen. This is my first slide of a genuine case of leukemia, and you have a big round ring of blue spots. This was taken down in Los Angeles area. And she had leukemia, and she was tired, gums were bleeding, just all of the symptoms of leukemia. And then she had a blood test, and she had a big case of leukemia, bruising heavily. First of all, it takes about maybe 4 to 6 weeks for the bruising to stop. Sometimes you get it stopped in 2 weeks, and then the gums stop bleeding, and then finally your energy comes back, you're alive again, and you're happy. And the blue spots gradually disappear. Next slide. Now this man's under tremendous stress. Doug, would you point out the stress lines in the brain area?
These ones right up in that area,
no,
the chemical, or just these all these heavy lines?
Okay, let me go through that. On this part right here, these lines that come all the way down in this area here, okay, this is tremendous stress as these red lines from the brain go right into the iris. This person's under tremendous stress. And they work about 20 hours a day, get about 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and they go and go and go. Here's a stroke as a result of it. Now, this, again, is your horizontal lines indicating toxic fumes and so on that are affecting the brain to where the brain is no longer functioning at top efficiency. Okay, so the horizontal lines going across this way will always be your toxic fumes. Toxic materials that you inhale, and then it'll affect the person adversely. Any questions? Next. I had to throw this one in.
I'm not sure. Is this the prolapsus?
This is a prolapsus of the uterus. Notice that it starts up in zone 3, and as the uterus prolapses down through the vaginal canal, it comes down like that. It's black. There's no circulation, no nerve supply in it, and where virtually this is a dead organ, and we did have to recommend cutting it out. which sometimes you wait so long and then it's too late to pack it back up there and keep it there and regenerate it. So this would be where you have a movement of that black spot from zone 3 down to, it'll actually go right to the edge of the iris as it's falling out of the vaginal canal.
John, how can one tell whether it looks like a cancer to me.
It is a cancer.
Ah, right.
If you go in there and check that glob of flesh that's degenerating, that's all cancerous tissue.
Uh-huh.
It has to come out.
Right, thank you.
Okay? It's gone so far you can't heal it naturally.
Next slide. There's more of your blue spots here. What
the horizontal lines.
Oh, okay. Just these more of the horizontal blood vessels up in the brain area, which is going to show the effect on the brain tissue of all the toxic fumes. It's often what you call a cabinet maker's eye. Okay.
Or boat builder's eye.
Boat builder. Anybody that's around a lot of the inhaled solvents, which have a tendency to settle out in the brain tissue. You'll see this.
Marijuana eye. You'll see that with marijuana smokers.
Okay, next one. Okay, we've got a number of the dots on the end of the indicating lines there. You'll notice that these ones, at least from where I'm sitting, look to be more on the brown side than the blue side, which is going to indicate a much higher degree of degeneration there. Certainly by the time you get a black dot on the end of an indicating line, you've almost always got a tumor. And even with a brown dot, you've got a pretty good chance of it.
Now, normally what happens is it begins with a little red dot on the end of a blood vessel, and the red dot turns to blue, and then the blue dot turns to brown, and the brown dot turns to black. And when you have a black dot in the iris of the eye, you know that the person has spent maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they've dissipated their life a bit, and they haven't got that junk out of their system yet. And you'll find that as the junk comes out of their system through a heavy cleansing program, then the black dot will slowly turn to brown, back to blue, possibly disappear entirely during that time, but it'll just pass through a red stage very briefly as the body goes through a very powerful healing. Any questions? Okay.
Next slide. Okay, more of the blue blotches here that have been associated with the leukemia and or the chemical poisoning.
This is a little Filipino girl who's deathly ill. Her eye is black with what they call, we mentioned before, the pathological polychromia.
Okay, next slide.
See how black the eye is?
Yeah. The question was, what do you do for that? Full program, I'd say, be the main answer.
It's the only answer.
Okay, well, that's fine. And I think we got probably the same eye again anyways. We've got a lot of the blotches up here and the very, very dark iris. Next slide. Okay, I think we're getting into the reflex stuff now. So what you're looking at in this eye is you're going to be dealing with your 180 reflex right here. This would appear to be a right eye. So you're probably dealing with, this could actually be either the pineal or the pituitary right up in this area. And you come straight across like that, and you're going to be dealing, it looks to me...
Take your go right through the center of the pupil.
So you've got your reflex from here straight across, and you'll notice the dent in the autonomic nerve wreath there, the radii solaris right through here, and the spread swollen fibers all through here, and then you come all the way out into this area. So you've got quite a lot of stuff all along that reflex angle there.
The one thing, too, I want to show you here on this one, I don't want you to forget the change of color in zone 1 and 2. Now, as you swing around, never forget to swing around the eye, and you got some there, and then right there you got another color change. Right there, Doug, go slow.
Right here.
Right in there. Now go slow around, follow through and around. Then it changes again. Mm-hmm. And then it comes back and it changes right there very badly. See that?
Yeah.
And it changes right in that area where you got the problems going out from there on a 0 degree reflex going straight on out. So that whole area is going to be affected. And you say, where do you start? And you start with the regular STO point and go down the pineal pituitary, hypothalamus, medulla, and go down right down through there, those areas. And don't underestimate the power of those points. They're wonderful. But go down through those and work those things out. And gradually you'll see the color start changing, and the person will start having passing a lot of stuff out through the colon, and the body goes through a tremendous amount of change.
Would that be a prolapsed uterus? And if it is, what suggestion would you make to somebody?
Which eye is it, first of all?
Oh, yeah, it's not going to be the uterus anyways because it's right.
See,
Yeah.
we're dealing with the right eye, so I would say we're dealing primarily with the pancreas and maybe the ovary on the right side. Okay? And if you look carefully, that'll probably be the kidney area, which will be going all the way back into the pupil, all the way back in. You have your problem there in your cecum area that'll have to be cleared out. But I don't see a prolapsus of the uterus. Okay?
Okay, next slide. Okay, we've got all sorts of reflex stuff here. A fairly obvious 180-degree reflex would be from this area right here, straight across to that, from here to here. Another one that would be quite obvious would be from this area right here, straight across to this area right here, and then further out into this area. So you've got a number of different reflexes there. You've probably also got a good 120-degree reflex between here, here, and here. And you can go on and on with the various spots here, but there's a lot of reflex activity in this particular iris.
Where do you start, Doug?
Full program and then some, perhaps.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. Okay, I would say, is that going to be a stroke up in that area, or is that just too low there for that?
You have a breakdown of tissue of some sort.
Some sort right in through here.
I have no idea. Now, if it is a person got, shall we say, pricked by a little straw, and on the surface of the cornea, then you're going to have that type of a blood vessel breakage also, which is an injury to the cornea. How do you know what you're looking at? You can't. You don't know. So you just take what you've got and you work with it.
Okay, a real obvious 180 is going to be from this area right here, straight across down into this whole area right there. You're going to have quite an obvious 180 right in through there.
Check the enclosure.
Right out here? Where have we got one?
Big one right here.
Okay, yeah.
You follow that right on in, you've got yourself a serious problem. Yeah. See the indent? That indent right there is very, very meaningful to you. That's going to be thyroid. And you check the thyroid, and then what is the thyroid? If you have a low thyroxine output, what do you look for? Pituitary. Remember thyroid, pituitary. Always remember that? We talked about that? You check those out very thoroughly and don't let that go past your notice. Now, of course, you've got other problems in here equally as bad. These indentations are very, very real, and that'll tell you the area that we really have to work at, and you follow that on your charts as best you can. Okay.
Next slide.
Hamburger.
Right down in through here, the brown pigmentation, which is John calls the hamburger, is going to show the gastrointestinal disturbances there. Okay, next slide. It would appear you've got a 180 from this area right here, straight up across to this pigment spot right in that area. Certainly got a few other reflexes here, but that would be a prime one. You see anything else?
Nope.
Okay, next. Okay, that's going to be probably about a 120-degree reflex right there from this pigment spot right here. over to this area right there. Next slide. Okay, go back, please.
Bronchial area versus the upper back. And so you have all this upper back pain, wondering where you got the upper back pain. Then you've got your bronchial area, which is quite darkened.
John, that pupil's very tight. What can you say about that?
It's got a tight pupil.
Apart from that.
What happens to a person when they're overstressed? Okay, but what happens to the person when they're really overstressed? Which organ is going to be affected? The adrenal glands. What happens when the adrenal glands are, let's say, are affected? The pupil enlarges, right? Okay. Now, what's the opposite of that? When they contract. Now, when you have a pupil contracting like that, what's that a sign of? Who knows?
I've always kind of thought it might be almost a hyperactivity of the adrenals, or they're really working overtime and haven't pooped out yet.
And the person is really, really going strong and strong and strong. You find this in businessmen. You find this in businessmen where they got that little tiny pupil and they're just going all out. And they're just driving relentlessly, and they haven't collapsed yet. And they do very good up until the age of 35. Then they have a heart attack and it's all over. But that little pupil is just present company accepted, Linda. I know who you're thinking of now. That little pupil, when that's there, it just shows the person is driving themselves beyond the bounds of reality. Okay.
Okay, you've got about a 60-degree reflex right here.
Well, basically it.
Yeah. Next slide. Okay, you've got approximately a 180 right there, and probably a 90 degrees over to maybe a 60 right there, but you've got a reflex right in that area. About another 60 approximately from here to here. You've got a number of different reflexes here in this eye. Okay, next slide.
I hope you appreciate that you don't see these black scurf rims anymore. You don't see them. They're pretty much gone. There you have a 120-degree reflex. And you pay close attention to that. Between 11 and 1 o'clock up above there, Doug, you have all those closed lesions, not closed lesions, radii sceleris. What does a person really need? Okay? They definitely need to have some good adjustments on the upper thoracic vertebrae, and possibly the first and second cervical.
Next slide. Okay, more of the cane field sprays here. You notice almost, I'd say virtually a black blotch on the end of that one right there, but quite some problems in this area. Next slide.
Let me tell you a little story about this lady. She's the wife of a very prominent newspaper editor on the east coast of the United States. And I was lecturing up in Maryland at the time. And in lecturing in Maryland, I ran across this one town called Columbia, Maryland, where everyone was either a PhD or a master's degree. And you had to have a high degree to live there. I mean, that was one of the codes. Anyway, this one lady came in to see me, and she had inhaled carbon tetrachloride, which is a deadly solvent. And you can see this now in her bronchioles. That's what it looks like. But right here, if you take a look at the lymphatic rosary, and it's pushed way in toward the pupil, at 8 o'clock, this is the liver area, and it's all discolored with your kind of a rust pigmentation. Okay? This rust pigmentation here shows a degenerate liver, and she does have an enlarged liver. So you always take a look here if a person's had any type of, let's say they're working in a cleaning establishment where they're exposed to solvent all the time. Check the liver out, and you'll see it. You'll see this connected to the lymphatic rosary, but also check up in here, in the bronchial areas.
Okay, next slide. I'd say the main thing on this eye would just be a tremendous amount of your closed lesions in pretty well all areas. Obviously, a constitution with a lot of challenges, and just start with a good full program there. You can certainly start to look at the lesions and look at some of the reflex activity. Like you can look at this 180 from here across to here, but I mean basically you've got so many lesions there anyways that pretty well everything's going to be affected, and you just kind of go with a good general program. Is there anything specific on that one, John?
Just what I've mentioned before, to look for, always start with the pupil and always start moving around, and you see the discoloration right in here, so you know you've got yourself a lot of cleansing, corn and fuzzies and whatnot to work with. But of course you've got your swollen fibers here, and so that would give priority to this area, and possibly this area, and possibly this area here. You can take a look at that, and your whole sheet will be full of prioritized areas that you really have to work with. So the best thing to do is just mark them as you go down through your sheet, and make sure you cover each step very thoroughly, because you don't want to miss a beat here. See the swollen fibers here with a little black hole here and here? This is in the lung area. Now you know that you're going to have problems there. So you just can't be too quick in trying to educate this person as to what their problems are. Oftentimes they'll take a look at themselves in time and realize that they've got a hacking cough that they have had for a long time, and will begin realizing that they may have emphysema, they may have cancer of the lungs. There could be several things that all fit in there together.
Sometimes the closed lesions are hereditary and sometimes not, John. Is that right? And I don't understand when what.
Most of the time they are going to be inherited. Because it takes a tremendous amount of degeneration on the body to create one in this lifetime.
Right. Okay, thank you.
We'll blame it all on our ancestors, of which we were. So now we have a chance to correct our indiscretions from several generations back. Okay? Okay? Okay.
Wasn't it the great sage Pogo that said, "I have met the enemy, and the enemy are us"?
Yes. Right.
Okay, next slide. Okay, we've got the blue blotch right there, and what would be the heart area. You've also got you've probably also got some electric shock or some sort of problem right there, where you've got the vertical line in the heart area.
Here's your indicating line through
crossing
here,
the indicating line there,
all the way in,
and probably that right there we want to hit on. Okay.
Any question there? What does this indicate right here?
It's going to indicate quite a problem in the heart, probably tending towards even congestive heart failure.
Atrophy of the heart muscles. Okay.
Okay, next slide.
This is the other eye of that same lady that had the carbon tetrachloride poisoning.
Okay. Next slide. Just a degeneration line in the back area, and tremendous numbers of these allergy lines all the way around there. Anything else on that one? Okay, next. Well, obvious color change right in through here, and reflexing out 0 degrees through this whole whole area of the brain.
A taxi driver living on 1/5 of a bottle of scotch every single day. And you can see the effect it's having up in the brain area, and you see that kind of a crystalline catarrh color over the entire surface of the iris. There you have alcohol in the extreme.
He's pickled.
Yeah. It's a she.
Very well preserved.
If you might check this out, if we can get that in very clearly, Pamela. Right in here, you see a red line coming across, which would be in the right here. A red. There you got it. See this heavy red line right through the liver area, right there, about 8 o'clock. That's a major area. Okay, next slide. Bottom line, just the closed lesions, Doug.
Okay, next slide.
More of the same.
Next slide. Okay, next. I think there should be another one after that. Should be a few more. Sama? Pardon?
I was just wondering whether to wait and ask the question after. Most of the time we've been talking about full program, and sometimes it hits me that if you look at the whole sheet, that's what you will call the full program, if you just look at the whole body electronic sheet. But then I wonder whether probably you will find time to actually go into it and see how we can work on that, on how we can actually come out with what we may consider a full program that is appropriate for a patient at some times, taking into consideration other factors.
Bottom line, if you remember in Health in the Human Mind, we dealt with first of all, the enzymes, SAMA, and the minerals, and then the B complex, the niacin, and then we worked with the very great necessity of the amino acids, where we have to have a good source of amino acids, preferably from a vegetarian source. And then we go from there to the flax oil, and then we'll have to have oxygen. And so you take a look, what's going to be available in the country where you are? But you take a look at all those things, and you put that person on that program. If they can't go to the toilet, you might want to put them on something like aloe vera juice, or a good LBS2 formula from Nature Sunshine, or something that'll get them to go. You may want to put them on a number of things to help clean out the lining of the intestine. There might be several things there you might want to use. So when we use a full program, we have a common sense program that'll be geared for that individual. And you take a look at the organs, you might have to support the liver sometimes with the liver formulation, or the kidneys with a kidney formulation. You may want to support the heart with a good hawthorn berry extract or something like that, which will also be very, very good in helping to clean out all of the junk, around the valves of the heart, which your hawthorn berry extract is known to do. So you're going to have to be wise and not overload the person unnecessarily. You're going to have to work with their free agency. What are they willing to do with the finances that they have, and then what can they substitute by going out here and substituting, shall we say, for minerals? Do they want to have a capsule, or do they want to have the rock dust? Do they want to have the coconut charcoal? You follow me? Okay, for enzymes, do they want the papaya in large amounts in the mature green form? Do they want kiwi fruit? And you're going to have to kind of check and find out what they're willing to work with. And it's not just a rigid program. It's a very mobile, flexible program according to where a person lives. If they're living up in Scandinavia, chances are they're not going to get a whole lot of fresh fruits and veggies, unless they're near a place where it's shipped in, on a daily basis. And even then, the question would be, when was it actually harvested? How many weeks did it take to get to the market? See, so you have to look at that. You have to look at it carefully. And therefore you have to go back and find out what can a person raise in his own greenhouse. Like wheatgrass juice we have growing here, which is beautiful stuff. And people can grow their own wheatgrass juice and maybe grow some of their own lettuces that they might want to have, and maybe their own tomatoes in their greenhouse. This is what we have to look at. So there's no one specific program, except you remember you have the asterisks on your on all the program sheets that you have. These are the important ones. That if you want for to really to give the person a full program, go by the asterisks. Some of the other things the person might elect to choose because it'll help things make more comfortable for them as they move along. Are you with me on that? Does that help you? Are you sure? Okay.
Esther?
Yeah, still based on what Sama just said, and this was something that I had in mind. We have a lot of problems. We would be facing more problems with that, with the supplements in Africa, but we have a lot of other things which we have been told can give us a couple of things. And there are two substances which I don't know whether we have any information about, and that is the kombucha tea and holy basil, what we call tulsi. I don't know whether we have any information on those.
Let's take the kombucha tea. It'll work for about 95% of the people a little bit, but there's not enough enzymes in there to replace an enzyme source. It just won't get the job done. The same thing with your with the leftover, from your wheat berries in the
Rejuvelac.
Rejuvelac. That still doesn't have enough enzymes in it to get the job done. It does a beautiful job for what it does, to help a person feel better, but to correct long-standing enzyme deficiencies, it doesn't get the job done. So therefore, there's about 5% of the people that use the kombucha tea, for one reason or another, become deathly ill on it. And it could be, what are the components of your kombucha tea? You've got your mushroom, and then what do you feed it? White sugar and a tea, black tea. And so you've got a question mark about what's in it in the way of the end result. And you might have a fermentation process, but how effective is it?
What I was finding out was, is it possible that that could just be added to some of the programs and, kind of a little bit of boost as well? That is using what we've got.
There's about 5% of the people that use kombucha tea that have a reaction to it, which is not a healing crisis reaction. I don't know I don't have the full understanding of it yet, but some people seem to thrive on it quite well. You have to be careful and work carefully with the person and find out what will work with them when you're getting off of the regular program.
We have a lot of hawthorn bushes, and I'm not quite sure. Is it?
Say it again.
We have a lot of hawthorn bushes.
Hawthorn.
Yeah, John.
Hawthorn berry.
Yeah, with the berries and the leaves. Is it the leaves and the berry that one takes?
The hawthorn berry is the key.
Just the berry.
Just
so
the berry.
You could make a tea out of it or something.
Oh yes, make an extract out of it. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah, good. Thank you.
A fresh berry, yes.
Okay, this is going to be another prolapse here.
What time is it?
Well, it looks to be about roughly 5-ish.
In which eye?
Right eye.
Okay, you tell me what you got there, folks. That's definitely a prolapsus of the uterus. I just want to show you that. That stands out. It's just a beautiful picture. It leaves no room for doubt because this lady has a very bad situation in that area. Next. I remember this gentleman. I walked into his antique store, and once again he submerges himself in about a fifth of scotch a day. Take a look at the autonomic nerve wreath, please, Doug, especially just all the way around. There's 4 areas of a frayed autonomic nerve wreath all the way around here. Very carefully, if you can see this, Pamela, get this in as clearly as you can, because this frayed autonomic nerve wreath is very, very real. You got 4 levels right there where Doug is. Count them.
These are actually at different depths in the iris there.
There, that's perfect.
Right in through this area right here. Again, I believe in through this area. Right all down through here. And it would appear to be right over in this area as well. You've got a lot of areas where you have all these different depths.
Please look at this. See this fiber going through here? And then back out again? And then you got a fiber going all the way down through here. And then you got another one, and you got another one, just like a frayed rope. And you take a look at this individual, and what is the level of the fibers in the eye? That's a real McCoy level 7. Does he feel any pain at all? Nothing bothers him. He doesn't feel any pain. He says, why should I get involved in body electronics? I feel wonderful. And he does. He feels absolutely wonderful. He's very successful at selling his antiques, and while he's sipping away on his bottle of scotch. That's his way of life. He didn't. His relatives wanted me to come to him. And I went down there and thoroughly enjoyed his antique store. He was very happy because I didn't try to force anything on him like his relatives did. I just said, do you mind if I have a picture of your eye for my collection? I got a good picture.
You collect antiques as well, then, I take it.
Yeah. This is Entiques.
Next slide. Oh.
Doug, pick out the areas, take the swing around, and pick out the area which really stands out that needs our undivided attention.
Well, just swinging around from the inside, a thing that stands out like a sore thumb is going to be right here.
Now, right there, take that black area. Mm-hmm. That's cancer. Whenever you have a cigar-shaped pigmentation, that'll always be cancer.
Yeah. And you can follow that out, and you're dealing with swollen fibers and other pigment spots and all sorts of things out here, but that would be the thing that I would jump at right away there. Okay, next.
Nope. Don't let that go yet. You got some major areas there, sir.
Okay, well, you can swing down through here, and you've got a lot of problems in this area right here. You've got color changes going on right here, all down through here. I mean, this whole area, all through the sigmoid and descending colon, is going to be quite a mess. I mean, this would be a person that would be a pretty prime candidate for the retention enemas. You follow that out, you've got all these lesions right in this area right here, probably in the adrenals.
What kind of lesions is this?
They're very narrow and very, very dark.
How about swollen fibers
around there?
You see that? You put that first on your list. See this one over here? You got swollen fibers around this area. You put that on your list. You don't let that go. Now you know that this is not going to heal until you heal in here, right? You got another one right up here. Do you see this one? A little black hole there surrounded by all this swollen fibers and a real problem. You got another one right here. Now these are the areas you have to go after with the point holding. And you might say, well, how do you know what it is? Well, you know that this will probably be in the area of the pineal because it's right up at 12 o'clock. And this might be in the area of the what? It's coming close to what time? 1 o'clock. That might be in the medulla area. You got a lot of things there to really consider. What's this right here?
Well, it looks like you've got more swollen fibers right in that area as well.
Okay. Now those are the areas you have to really put on your sheet and go for. And then watch things slowly heal, and sometimes it takes a while. Any questions? Next.
Well, one thing I would jump at in this case would be this doubling of the autonomic nerve wreath right here. If you look right in this area there, you can see the parallel strands of the autonomic nerve wreath. There's certainly other things to look at, but that's something for me that really stands out like a sore thumb right in this area. Anything else on that one?
Ascending colon.
Right, the whole ascending colon right there. It's quite dark, and the autonomic nerve wreath goes out quite a bit. So things are going to be very, very sluggish all through that area, and reflexed out into the probably out into the lungs there, heart and possibly lungs. What's that?
Righto.
Okay, next slide. Now you've got quite a radii solaris coming down through the kidney area, really pretty well going from the from the pupil all the way out to zone 7 there. You've got some areas where you've got basically holes, in the fiber structure in through here. You've got this color change right in this area to consider.
Check the thyroid.
The thyroid's certainly going to be a problem right there, where you see all the dark fiber structure right in through there in the whole thyroid area. Looks to me like you may have a bit of a transversal right across in here too. It's a little hard to find it, but it looks to me like you got that blood vessel coming in through there. I can't quite follow it in here. I can see one coming in there and one coming in there, and I'm assuming they're going to cross over somewhere in that area.
Problem area.
Yeah.
Now, have you all come to the point where you realize you don't want to miss the forest by looking at the individual trees? Okay, so where do you start? You start with a good sound program, bottom line.
Okay, next slide. Well, I would say probably we'd want to consider the liver right in that area as a possibility, and something up there in the brain area.
That's right.
Next slide. I'd be pretty concerned about the adrenals right in this area with that pigment spot. Certainly, you're going to have a lot of corn and fuzzies here because you've got a lot of the tremendous amount of black sand inside this whole area, and that obviously here in the sigmoid colon is going to have a direct reflex here on the adrenals.
Which eye is this?
It would be a left eye.
Left eye. Okay. See the little black tail on that one area where right there.
Right there.
See that little black tail coming down? Okay. Now, history on this person. May I have the lights on, please, for just a moment? Because we're going to get down serious on this one now. This little lady couldn't... Can I have the lights on, please? Oh, somebody's back there. Okay. Turn them up. Good. This little lady was one of the sweetest women you could ever meet. Her husband was just a very dear friend of mine. But she would walk downtown Chicago for about 1 block, and then she'd collapse, and her husband would have to almost carry her back to the car, take her home, and put her in bed. She was good for about 2 hours a day. That's all. About 2 hours a day. And she was going downhill like this, and nobody knew what the problem was. Where was that black spot in the eye? The adrenal gland. Now, that's what you have to look for. It was a black blotch, and the little tail was black in the adrenal gland. This is adrenal cancer. Okay, we got her on the program. The rest of the eye cleared up. She passed corn and fuzzies and everything. But what happened to the adrenal? Nothing. I went down, you've got the chart on your material. You've got the chart for your different organs and so on. I went down the lower back, and I couldn't feel anything out of the ordinary, except it just seemed kind of smooth. And it turned out that she had a huge mass of calcification on her lumbar area, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th thoracic vertebrae and lumbar area. And when she was a kid, after holding points, the memory began to where she had a deep hatred for her mother, and she had a deep hatred toward her father. But she never remembered this, because she said, I love everybody, and she really felt she did. But then what happened is her mother left her in a little carriage, and she rolled down the steps of this courthouse, and she bounced her back down this on her back area here on the courthouse steps, and she felt betrayed by her mother, that her mother would leave her alone to where she'd be hurt. Now that was very, very important. At the same time of her life, the father left the mother. And so she was mad at the father for leaving as a young girl, just as a very young girl. Very angry, very suppressed, because father wasn't there to cuddle her and nourish her anymore. So, two things that happened. When we finally dissolved, by working with thumbs gently on this lower back area, we found out that we had one vertebrae rotated this way, and we had another vertebrae rotated the other way. So when the father and him leaving the mother came up, that one vertebrae popped back into line, which was rotated to the right side of the body. And when she went through the pain of falling down the steps on these rocky, where her back was on these rocky corners of the steps, she went, and the vertebrae popped back in the other side. Now both of these are in the adrenal area. Now as soon as those went back into position, then within a month's time, that black, I'll call it a bush, that black bush in the adrenal area disappeared, and her health started improving right now. Now, bottom line, in your notes, if you have a black spot in the eye that is not changing, or a brown bush, or because those are dangerous also, brown bushes or black spots that are not moving properly, you want to make sure you check that back area very carefully and make sure that all of the calcifications are dissolved up and down the spine. All you need is a thumb. Sometimes if you're a little gal and you're working on a great big man like, there's a lot of big men in here, and working on any of the big men, you might want to use a little elbow because you won't get enough pressure with the thumb. But just an elbow on those areas. But men, I wouldn't really use thumbs on or elbows on the women unless you've got yourself a huge calcification coming from a broken back or something like that. And you want to get the full impact of the burning, searing pain. Then go in on your elbow and get that lower lumbar straightened out, or any of the vertebrae that may have been broken during trauma, and do it intuitively till you know exactly how much pressure to put on that. But you want to get, in every single case, you'll want to get that spine straightened out so that you get the nerve supply and circulation back to that organ, which will be reflected then in the iris of the eye. Is this clear? Any questions on that or doubts? Okay, the only thing you have to do is learn your anatomy there, and you've got all the material there to just kind of go through there and hit about 3 vertebrae on one side and 3 vertebrae on the other side, and you'll find that you'll take care of all of the individual differences. So normally if you say it's a 7th thoracic vertebrae, you might want to go from the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, and the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, and get them all. And get that whole area while you're going after only one symptom that you're looking for. Because of the nerve differences from one person to the other will be quite extreme in some cases. Okay? What number are we on, Pamela? 58. We're just about done there. I think we can handle that before noon. Now, some of you have appointments at noon and thereabout, so don't get too worried. I think we'll get through this. Are you enjoying this phase of it? Are things kind of cementing together for you? Jenny, did you get a good sleep? Yes. Okay. Let's go on. If we can get the doors and somebody can get the lights again. There we are. Okay, and we take the next one, Doug. Go back to this adrenal. This is very powerful. This did not disappear at all until we got the until everything else was cleared away in the eye, but this did not disappear until we got the spine straightened out. So don't forget the spine. You see all the calcifications up and down the spine here, all the pigment spots and everything. That's from old injuries, especially down here through the lower lumbar. So always check the spine out in the eye, check it out in reality, and see what you've got to work with. Pardon me?
Would you only work on the spine after you've done the rest of the point of the endocrine system?
The question is, do you work on the spine after you work on the endocrine system? The answer is yes. The reason for this is that to get the calcification dissolved properly, you need to get all the endocrine system working, because the hormones from the endocrine system work as a catalytic agent to help with the transmutation of elements. You'll find that if you don't have the hormones there, the person has been on a cooked food diet for a long time and they're not on a raw food diet, they're not going to get the results because they won't have the necessary amino acids present, to get the job done. Now, if you're taking your grain fields, you're going to get all of your amino acids, and that's going to be assured. And that should be, in my eyes, really for the serious person that wants to really work their body through the mill and want to get into some real serious healing crises, then take your grain fields, make sure you get all of your amino acids. Then you know that all of the hormones will be there, and it will be there to support the endothermic and exothermic reactions that you have to go through. Now, I'm thrilled because, things didn't work for me for a long time. Things are working for me now personally, and it's just been finding these different things that we have to take in our program to help us through. And then things really come to the fore. But we have to have our hormones present as a catalytic agent to help with the exothermic and endothermic reactions so that healing crisis will really take place properly. We have somebody up here. Okay. Vivian.
Are all the amino acids also in the powder? I mean, not only in the liquid of the grain fields. Is it if we just take the powder? I'm thinking of having it shipped back. That's
take the powder.
That's okay, is it?
The other is going to be your acidophilus, which most people are in deficient amounts of.
Yeah.
But once you get it well established and take care of yourself, you should have a good continual flow of activity with the acidophilus in your intestine.
Yeah, thank you.
The powder is where the amino acids will be.
Okay, next slide. I guess basically just a very, very broad scurf rim where you see the lymphatic rosary all way pushed in right here. You'll notice how far in that's moved all the way around.
All the way around.
All the way around there, you'll see the lymphatic rosary is moved way in, and hence the scurf rim is going to be very, 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 very thick, very, very large there.
Doug, do you see this anymore?
Not very often. Very.
I don't see this.
I haven't seen one in a real. I haven't seen one in a real person in a long time. So yeah, probably not.
I think we're moving through a lot of morphogenetic resonance, and I don't see this anymore.
This is from the dinosaur collection, I guess.
1980 variety.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
In 15 years, we've come a long ways. Let me just go through this one, Doug. This is beautiful. take a look at this enclosure and this enclosure, and of course this is going to be in the back area. You follow this right on in, and there's your indentation, your pigmentation variation here. You got that? You got a little pigment spot here. And so here you've got a back problem, which is just really, and the upper part of the back is in terrible condition. And this is where it shows up pretty much. Now you might say, well, then maybe that's not just the upper back, but it looks like it could be from the upper to the middle, but the enclosure takes in the whole back, doesn't it? Question? The enclosure takes in really the entire spinal area. And so you look at this one up here, and this is minimized compared with this. But so a lot of work will have to be done on that spine area.
Okay, next slide. Well, there's certainly a number of things that we could look at. But one thing that kind of leaps out for me at first glance is you've got this fork right here, which if you trace it in here, you're going to have these very, very dark lesions surrounded by the swollen fibers right in this area, which I believe would be the pancreas right there. So this would be a right eye, and that's out around 7 o'clock or so. So that's certainly one place to start. Obviously, you've got a lot of stuff to deal with in the entire digestive area, where you've got a lot of the gray putty and black sand here. It's very, very dark inside the autonomic nerve wreath. The autonomic nerve wreath's very, very exaggerated. So there's a lot of different things to deal with there. Is it? Oh, perhaps it is. Well, at any rate, you're still going to have this fork right here pointing in, and whatever that's going to be in that area, it is a dark lesion with the swollen fibers around it. I think you may be right. That may be a left eye. John?
I think it's the left eye. And that would be in the back area then.
Yeah. It would appear also that you've got a bit of a blue blotch up there in the area of the thymus that's kind of going off the screen, but right up in that area it looks quite blue there. I mean, it'll get worse than that, but you do seem to have the beginning of a blue blotch up there. Also, I would point out, you've got a very, very heavy arcus senilis here, where if you look here in the lower extremities, look how far the sclera is pulled up over the iris right here. So you've got a very, very poor flow of nutrients to the entire body.
Now, the arc of senility, or the arcus senilis, is not just limited to the top of the eye. And Doug, point that out up there if you would. There's the arcus senilis up there, but you also have it down below. Now, Dr. Bernard Jensen would call this anemia in the extremities. And the person really has no circulation in legs, feet, brain area, and they're slowly working themselves out of existence. Okay?
Okay, next slide.
One thing and one thing only I want you to see. What's that up there? Pituitary tumor. And what else is going to be affected by that? Where? There you have it, right there. That's that simple.
Okay, next slide. Very, very, very heavy dark scirphium all the way around here. Anything else on that one, or?
Not. That's fine.
Next.
Please take a look at the fiber level, Doug, and the kind of the enclosures over here, and compare how the, if you can see that, how the lymphatic rosary is beginning to go in that area.
Yeah, over in this whole area here, you've got a number of your enclosures, and you'll notice that in the corresponding area of the iris, the lymphatic rosary is moved. It's heavier, and it's also moved in quite a bit. Plus, you've got all sorts of irregularities in the fiber structure all through here, a lot of little dark holes and swollen fibers and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff all through that area. Okay, next slide.
Now my question is, where do you start? Where do you start? Complete program. And now this is important. There's one area that needs tremendous support, as you would on every program. Where is it? That's it. See it? See the swollen fibers and the dark hole there? That's definitely going to be a pancreatic problem. And whenever you have a person who has a pancreatic problem, if you don't work with that and work with that properly and keep up on your proteolytic enzymes, you're going to have problems as you begin the program. And I think you already understand that. Is there anybody that doesn't? Okay. The pancreas needs to have full support. That's why it's up on your very front of your program sheet. Because we have to get that pancreas working to secrete the proper proteolytic enzymes like your chymotrypsin and so on to help to eat up abnormal tissue, which we've discussed in Health and Human Mind, okay? You understand that? And in the meantime, we still have to be heavily supportive of the proteolytic enzymes in several different forms that we've talked about, from the protease onto the papain, onto the actinidin in the kiwi fruit, and so on. And so the person is getting a full supply of these things. Now, this is important here, because here you have your a serious problem in the pancreas, because the fibers are swollen and you have a rather dark hole back in those swollen fibers. This is going to be a major issue here. Okay.
Okay, next slide.
Doug, what condition is the colon in?
It's going to be very, very sluggish, very atonic, because you've got a very, very broad autonomic nerve wreath. All the fiber levels very, very dark and recessed there. You continue on into here within zone 1 in the stomach musculature area. You've got all sorts of kind of gray putty and black sand. The whole digestive system is really quite a shambles, and it's going to require quite a lot of work there.
Now this guy can't poop. Now what are you going to do for him? What are you going to tell him to do so they can? One every 3 days is about the way it goes here. Now how are you going to get this person to work properly? Doug?
Well, there's a time and a place for some individuals for the herbal laxatives. You have to be a little bit careful not to get dependent on them, but you're going to just take a lot of time to really get that colon to regenerate. You're going to need to get on certainly all the minerals and enzymes and acidophilus and the pawpaw and all those sorts of things. Colonics will be helpful. Lots of roughage. A lot of your greens that'll be very high in your chlorophyll. Psyllium, which would give some, or the isabgol, which would give a good bit of fiber to get things going. But it's going to take some doing. I mean, I would be pretty surprised with a person in that rough shape if their bowel habits turned around overnight. I think this might take a year or more to really get them going regularly.
On the program you just suggested to them, I'm sure their bowels will turn around overnight.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's just important for people to realize that if you take an individual that's had very, very bad elimination for years and years and years, I know some people get very, very frustrated because they get on the program and they're still constipated or they're still having problems, and it's just important to realize that it's not going to turn around overnight for everybody. Some people are going to have to work at it for months or even years before the bowels are going to work normally, because you're dealing with a lot of years and a lot of genetic overlays, and it can take quite some time.
Now, what happens to some of these old birds after they've worked at it? What happens to that sluggish bowel, the autonomic nerve wreath?
Well, as the bowel gets progressively less sluggish, the entire autonomic nerve wreath is going to start to move in a bit closer to the pupil. And
now, have you seen that happen?
I've seen it happen to some degree. I haven't seen anything this far out. Probably the greatest movement I've seen would probably be in your eye, where you started way out there and it's moved in a good bit. But it's I know how many years that's taken to happen. And you will get the opposite in people's eyes too, where you get some people where the autonomic nerve wreath is all collapsed in against the pupil, and gradually with a lot of work it'll move out there. The thing to realize though is that a person speaking from my own experience, where I started out with a very, very tight autonomic nerve wreath, you can, on the one hand, get on a very good program, and after maybe a couple of years of effort, get to the point where you're having bowel movements, quite regularly, and everything appears to be working fine. And yet, if you look at the iris of the eye, and you realize that you've still got a lot of the pigmentation there in the center, that the autonomic nerve wreath still has its glitches and all, you realize that even though things appear to be working quite fine, you're not really out of the woods yet. And I mean, I found myself, 10, 11 years down the line on the program, still going into healing crisis here and there and passing fuzzies. And as John likes to kid me, I'm probably still in the manufacturing business there. So the thing to realize is you haven't, even though the bowels seem to be working quite well, you haven't really gotten to the root of it until you've seen the full change in the iris of the eye, and that can take a lifetime to get to.
John, could you talk to us a little more about the pros and cons of colon irrigation?
Colon irrigation. Could we have the lights on for just a moment there? Okay. In colon irrigation, first of all, you should be using a good gravity flow technique so that you don't put any undue pressure on the colon wall. If the colon wall is herniated to any degree, such as what you would have with diverticulitis, sometimes you can herniate the wall of the large intestine here. You can herniate that and cause some very serious infections, which could result from that. Now, I haven't seen any, but I've heard of a lot of it from the wrong type of use of colon therapy where there has been pressure involved, and where people have used it in cases like Crohn's disease, where the walls of the intestine are tissue paper thin, and in many cases are all ulcerated and infected, where just a little bit of pressure and just a little bit of massage work in there can rupture that colon wall, and you are then having all this seepage going out into the abdominal cavity. Now, if you have a bad case of tapeworms, you can also, the tapeworms are quite vigorous and quite powerful, and with colonic therapy you can drive that tapeworm out into the tissues of the body. And then it becomes quite difficult to get rid of that tapeworm, because here he's moving now around through the tissues, and if he still is letting his eggs germinate, so to speak, then you sometimes will find the tapeworm up here in the cornea of the eye. You'll find it in different parts of the body where you've got some good heavy parasites. So before you start a good colon therapy program, you should be on a good program for about 2 weeks, which will take care of your parasite cleansing program and get your parasites out of your system. Now, Dr. Edward Carl was a brilliant man, and we were trained under him down in Mexico years ago, and he taught one principle that I really enjoyed, because he said on any type of a parasite cleansing program, if you don't get out the amoebic parasite, then you haven't given the person a real program. So what he did is he put people on about 20 15-grain tablets of chaparral herb 3 times a day. This is what you're eating with each meal. And you'd usually have a good fresh and raw diet with some cooked food. But about 20 of these big 15 grain, see, the normal tablet will be about maybe 7.5 grain. These are the big ones, the 15 grain.
The horse pills.
Yeah, horse pills. And you'd have about 20 of those 3 times a day. Along with that would be 2 capsules of what they call the colloidal sulfur, which would be the flowers of sulfur. And you take 2 capsules of that, of the double-aught capsule. That's a big capsule of your colloidal sulfur. And you do that 3 times a day, and you do that for 7 days. Now, after 7 days, normally all people who went to Mexico would either have the amoebic parasite or they would catch it there. So nobody was immune. And you had a fecal examination which would then give you the indication of the parasite that you were dealing with. Now, if you had the tapeworms in the colon area, in the intestinal area, those left by the nearest exit. And any other roundworms and pinworms and what have you would just be removed from the body. But the hardest one to get would be your amoebic parasite. And so what we'd have, it would have for the first, we'd have for the first week, we'd get about 95% of the people would be totally free of amoebic parasites. Then, if there were still some there by fecal examination, then you'd wait 1 week, and then you'd hit it again for another week, and that would usually take care of it for everybody. But now that would be 20 15-grain chaparral tablets 3 times a day with 2 double-aught capsules of flowers of sulfur 3 times a day. That's all that he gave you for a parasite cleansing program. And it really worked quite beautifully. And that would take care of the parasites by fecal examination. Now, I don't believe you can test properly for parasites in the intestines without a good fecal examination in a good, legitimate laboratory. A lot of people pull out their pendulum and they no parasites, you're free. And I have my questions concerning that. And that, with all due respect to parasite indicators with pendulums, I don't think with the pendulum or with kinesiology you're going to get that refined in your findings. But you will have it by a good laboratory analysis, and I think here's where you need to have a good laboratory working for you, working with you on this particular area. Dr. Edward Carl, he had the Port of Health in Chula Vista near Ijijic, which was near Lake Chapala, just north of Guadalajara in Mexico.
Is the Hulda program just as good, John?
Hulda Clark has a program which is uniquely Hulda's.
Ah.
Now, she uses black walnut, which we have used for years. She also uses cloves, which is stopping the eggs from hatching and so on. And she also uses the wormwood, which we have used off and on for years. Now, these are good parasite cleanses. We have nothing against it whatsoever. It's a good program, but what Hilda has really made her contribution is showing the different poisons and toxins that are in the foods and preservatives and jars and whatnot. And she's made a wonderful, wonderful contribution, which is entirely unique.
But her program would be as good as the chaparral, the one that you've just mentioned, or what?
I'm telling you this from Dr. Edward Carl's work, which was entirely unique. He found that this got rid of all the parasites in the intestine, not the rest of the body. Now, Hulda Clark says about the propyl alcohol, that we've all used rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. Every one of us has been exposed to rubbing alcohol here and there, and that, according to Hulda Clark, which may be true, is a real cause of your parasites in the body.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay? Yeah. Now, Hulda Clark, I have no negative. Okay? It's a positive program as far as I'm concerned.
I was just going to ask, in the United States in the last few years, it's gotten to be pretty well impossible to get chaparral anymore. And I was just wondering, for those of you in other countries, is this something that's widely available anymore? It's pretty well. I haven't seen it available in the States for a couple of years. Anna? Does it grow in Australia?
If you go from Utah down to California and all through Arizona, you find the most beautiful, far as you can see, chaparral growing. And if somebody could get that started down here, I think it would be just a marvelous herbal addition to the Australian environment.
I would think with all the desert area in Australia, there's got to be a place where it would grow just fine.
Oh, it'd be beautiful. Okay.
It's like a little shrub.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and from my experience in Cameroon, we used to use Vermox, which is like a broad intestinal parasite drug. Now, my question has been, despite my desire not to use anything that is pharmaceutical, I have been thinking about the idea that if, for example, mostly patients who are from the tropics, if you don't even have the facility to do a stool examination, will it be wise, for example, to say, okay, they can just go in one dose of Vermox, which is needed, before they go on a colonic clean, if you cannot have this program available to them?
One dose would not be sufficient. Yeah, I don't think one dose would be sufficient. Pardon me? Of any type of vermifuge, I don't think that would be sufficient. What I do know is that the seeds of the papaya, or the pawpaw, I think of Jim Geither now going to be a new pawpaw, but here in the pawpaw, you have the seeds of the pawpaw are a tremendous vermifuge. And it's the only vermifuge which, for example, the Indians in the Amazon, which is very parasite infected, that's the only thing they take. And they clean themselves out, and if they take a trip, they take a little pack on their waist of pawpaw seeds. And that cleans them out just regularly, and they have no problem. So I want you to think about that.
I'd like to try growing the chaparral. I don't live in a dry area, but if anyone has seeds they could post to me, I'd be happy to try that.
Do we have anybody that would love to get some chaparral, seeds or otherwise, from the States? Okay, I mean, who would make it a task to get a hold of that? Okay, Jane Hammer. Jane, you're living in Arizona. You've got it all over the place there. You know what chaparral looks like? It's everywhere. Okay, you can't miss it. I mean, it should be the national herb. It's called the creosote bush. I mean, you know what the creosote bush is. Okay, check it. That's your chaparral. But all the locals will know chaparral. What I used to do, now remember, chaparral is a suppressive. It'll drive out your parasites. But you make it a strong tincture. Just boil it down and boil it down and boil it down until it's just like a creosote. That's why they call it the creosote bush. It's very powerful, a very wonderful herb, but it is a suppressive agent. The reason why is you'll smell like high heaven, your urine will smell like chaparral, your feces will smell like chaparral, your skin, your breath, everything will smell like chaparral until it's out of your system.
When I was first on the program, I was taking some chaparral, and I think I was taking maybe 5 or 6 capsules a day, somewhere in that ballpark. And truthfully, I think I hated the chaparral even more than I hated the minerals when I got in the program, because I felt like my brain tasted like chaparral. I mean, it was just like everywhere in the body. It's wretched stuff.
So we can safely use the papaya seeds, and would this be sufficient for all the parasites?
To my understanding, yes. I may be in error. But the thing is, for people who have parasites, in Polynesia, that's what they have used for centuries. They put the person on the papaya seeds, just the whole papaya seeds, out come the parasites, no problem. All of them.
Actually, I want to say something about the pawpaw papaya seed. Now, we've been traveling for well, close to 30 years, for years in Africa and years in South America, well, all over the world, really. And we were the only ones on all our trips who, except once, but that's another story, we never ever had parasites. And we've talked to a lot of travelers, and practically all of them had them. And we even went home and had ourselves tested and everything. And we had probably about 4 or 5 big spoonfuls of these pawpaw seeds and chewed them. We never got parasites, both of us, Viv and I.
Every day? Was that every day?
That was as often as we could get them, and that was more or less every day, actually, except in the mountains.
Thank you very much, Wolf. Okay, any more questions? Doug, we continue on. Lights, please. We're coming close to the end now. Be patient here with us.
Okay, next slide. Okay, a fairly heavy scurf rim there. Is there anything in particular on this?
Mucoprotein.
Very, very heavy mucoprotein buildup all through here, where you've got the continuous bands that have really gone pretty well brown in color, going from zone 6 right into zone 3. So,
now what do we do, sir?
Well, in order to eliminate the mucoprotein, you're going to have to look at it from several different angles here. I mean, obviously it's going to take a pretty heavy program, but you're going to need the lymphatic enzymes or the combination of the amylase and protease to help digest out the mucoprotein.
Go over that again. Now, the reason I want this, because some of you have some very serious problems that will be associated with very heavy mucoprotein. And I have found that until that mucoprotein comes out, those problems will not be resolved. And after the mucoprotein comes out, then we get the nerve supply and circulation fully restored to the cells, and we start having regeneration and reversal of, shall I use, pathological conditions.
So that the mucoprotein being protein and carbohydrate, you're going to need the combination of the protease and amylase, which you can get separately or as the lymphatic enzymes. You're also going to need to work on the digestion in general so that you don't just keep contributing to the problems. You're going to need very high dosages of enzymes to make sure you're properly digesting what you're taking in now. I mean, it doesn't do much good to try to clear out the mucoprotein if you're sort of simply reforming more mucoprotein faster than you're getting rid of it. And with the mucoprotein, the other thing you always have to look at is going to be the thyroid. That's going to be a big priority to work on the thyroid, because that's usually a contributing factor. And patience, because it can take quite a while for this all to clear out. But until it does, as long as you have that heavy mucoprotein buildup, you're just not getting the nutrients out to the cells like you should. You're not getting the waste products away from the cells like you should, and it's just going to be a lot harder of a job to heal anything in the body, regardless of where it is.
Okay, Doug, do you go right directly to the thyroid and start working with that?
Well, the thyroid's not, you have to look at it from two directions. The thyroid's not going to work if you don't have the endocrine glands above it working. So you've got to take care of the pineal, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then, of course, the medulla ties in there. Because if any of those glands or organs are compromised, then the thyroid can't possibly work properly. So you've got to start your point holding from the top down. Simultaneously, if you're starting down, like, for example, with a level 6 or level 7 eye, where you're down at the level of the gonads or the spleen, you're going to have to take care of those and make sure those are working, just so you can get up to the level of the pancreas and adrenals and get those working, which is at the grief level, which then hopefully will get you up there to the fear level where you can get the thymus working. And once all of those things are working, then you're going to be in business where you can actually get the thyroid working. So you really have to approach the thyroid from either direction, both directions simultaneously if you're going to get it to go properly.
Now, do you all understand that? Now, that's spot on. Now, do you have any questions on that part before we leave it? Because this mucoprotein is exceedingly important, and that just doesn't come out easily. Okay?
John?
I'm deeply troubled by your enthusiasm for sending in chaparral seeds and growing chaparral here in Australia. Australia is a continent cursed by terrible weeds that have been introduced by people in their enthusiasm for a particular flower or particular plant. African bone seed, for instance, seems an innocent enough little flower, but it's gone absolutely crazy in mountainous regions of Australia and is killing off everything else because nothing else can sprout its seeds. And if chaparral grows in enormous quantities in Arizona and other states, it seems to be a plant that will take over areas. And if it took over the Australian outback, it might choke out scores of native plants and kill off native animals, because it would not have its natural parasites here in Australia, especially if you shipped in the seed and then grew the chaparral. It would not have the natural parasites which it has in Arizona. And so it would have no enemy, and so it would multiply with fantastic rapidity.
Like rabbits.
Like rabbits. And they introduced the rabbit so they could do a little bit of hunting, and now we know that the rabbit is ruining virtually all of Australia. And so chaparral seems to me to be a particularly dangerous thing to introduce because it grows so well in the United States. But there it must have a multitude of enemies which prey on it all the time. But if you shipped in the seed here in Australia, it would have no enemies. So I'd like you to consider that before you bring in seeds.
Never considered that, John. Thank you very,
Thank you,
very
John.
much. Point well taken.
Cape change.
Plenty of pawpaw seeds. Okay.